Hello guys, welcome to Fiction Quest. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto was sent to One Piece and got a harem of Nami, Robin, and Vivi? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Maelstrom and the Navigator. The end was not a bang, but a tear. One moment, Naruto Uzumaki was standing in the incandescent ruin of a dead god's dimension, the air thick with ozone and fading power. Sasuke was beside him, Sakura was a short distance away, and Kakashi was there. They had won. The fourth great ninja war was over. The next moment, reality fractured. It didn't explode, it ripped, like a wet sheet of paper, and the final spiteful act of a dying consciousness was a desperate pull. It yanked him backward. Not a physical force, but a fundamental negation of his place in the universe. Sasuke's hand shot out, lightning crackling around his Rinnegan, but his fingers closed on empty air. Naruto saw a flash of pure panic on his rival's face, an emotion he hadn't seen since they were children. And then the world dissolved into a screaming vortex of color and pressure. "Kid, what is this?" Kurama's voice was a low growl in his mind, a rumbling anchor in the non-space he was tumbling through. Some last-ditch teleportation jutsu. Naruto thought back, his body feeling like it was being simultaneously crushed and pulled apart. He tried to mold chakra, to ground himself, but there was nothing to grip. No nature energy to draw upon, no solid reality to push against. He was a leaf in a divine hurricane. "This isn't a jutsu," Kurama corrected, his own immense power churning uselessly. "This is wrong. The world is breaking." Then, the tearing sensation stopped, replaced by a sudden, violent reassertion of physics. He was falling. The air was thick, wet, and tasted of salt. Below him, an endless, churning expanse of dark blue water stretched to a horizon that seemed far too curved. A piercing scream ripped from his lungs as gravity took hold, and he hit the water like a meteor. The impact was a full-body cataclysm. The cold was a shock, so profound it felt like a burn. Water flooded his lungs, and the last of his consciousness fled, leaving only the deep, instinctual thrum of Kurama's chakra desperately trying to keep his heart beating. Nami saw the falling star first. It wasn't a star, it was a streak of orange and gold against the bruised twilight sky, too fast and too violent. It plunged into the sea a few miles from the shore of her island, and the sound of its impact reached her a moment later, a deep, percussive whump that vibrated through the hull of her small caravel. Her first instinct, honed by years of survival, was to ignore it. Strange phenomena on the seas of the Grand Line, and even in the comparatively peaceful East Blue, were invitations to an early grave. But this wasn't the Grand Line. This was her home, and that thing, whatever it was, had fallen dangerously close to the Konami Islands. Close to Kokoyasi. Curiosity killed the cat, she muttered to herself, her knuckles white on the tiller. But another part of her, the part that still remembered hope, whispered a different story. Arlong owned this sea. No marine, no pirate, no thing entered his territory without his knowledge. Whatever that was, it was an anomaly. And in Nami's world, anomalies were opportunities. She changed course, the sailcloth groaning in protest. Her heart hammered against her ribs. A frantic rhythm of fear and a desperate, foolish flicker of excitement. It took her nearly an hour to find him. He was floating face down, a patch of garish orange in the dark water. His clothes were bizarre. A tattered black jacket with orange trim, shredded black pants. His hair was a startling shock of sun yellow, plastered to his head and neck. For a moment, she thought he was dead. But as her boat drifted closer, she saw the faint, rhythmic pulse of golden light under his skin, a soft glow emanating from his abdomen. It was like watching a captured firefly, weak but persistent. With a grunt of effort that spoke of long days hauling lines and treasure, she leaned over the gunwale, hooked her arms under his, and heaved. He was heavier than he looked, dense with muscle, but she managed to drag his torso onto the deck. He lay there, water streaming from his clothes, utterly still save for that strange, fading light. His face was unexpectedly kind. Even unconscious, there was a softness to his features that warred with the sharp, lean lines of a fighter. 3 faint, whisker-like marks adorned each cheek, giving him a feral, foxy look. He was young, maybe her age or a little older. He was also hurt. Deep gashes and burns that looked days old marred his arms and chest, yet they seemed to be closing even as she watched, the skin slowly knitting itself back together. With a faint shimmer of that golden energy. "What in the hell are you?" she breathed. She worked quickly, her pragmatism overriding her fear. She checked his pulse, strong and steady. She rolled him onto his side, pressing on his back until he coughed up a lungful of seawater. He groaned, a low, pained sound, and the golden light on his stomach flickered more brightly for a second before dimming again. Dragging him into the small cabin was another ordeal. She stripped off his ruined jacket and shirt, revealing a litany of scars, old and new, layered over a physique that was all lean, functional power. The seal on his stomach was an intricate spiral, a vortex of black ink that seemed to draw the eye. It was the source of the light. She did what she could, cleaning the wounds that weren't already healing with a speed that defied belief. She wrapped him in dry blankets and sat back on her heels, chewing on her lip. This was a mistake, bringing a man this powerful, because no normal person, healed like that, to Arlong's island was like bringing a lit torch into a powder magazine. But when she looked at his face, peaceful in his forced slumber, she didn't feel the predatory wariness she felt around other powerful men. She felt a strange sort of kinship. He was a survivor. The proof was written into his skin. And right now, he needed help. "Just don't be an idiot," she whispered to the sleeping man. "Don't be a hero. There are no heroes here." Naruto woke up in pieces. The first thing he registered was the gentle rocking motion. The second was the smell of tangerines and salt. The third was a dull, throbbing ache that encompassed his entire body. He cracked an eye open. He was in a small, cramped wooden room. Sunlight streamed through a single, grimy porthole. He was lying on a narrow cot, covered by a thin but warm blanket. His tattered jacket was gone, his torso bare. He tried to sit up, and a wave of dizziness and nausea washed over him. "Easy there," a voice said. It was sharp, but not unkind. He turned his head. A young woman with vibrant orange hair was sitting on a crate in the corner, sharpening a short, three-sectioned staff with a whetstone. She watched him with calculating blue eyes, her movements economical and precise. "Where?" he rasped, his throat raw. "My boat," she said, not stopping her work. "You took a nosedive into the ocean. You're lucky I was the one who found you." He pushed himself up, gritting his teeth against the protest of his muscles. "Kurama, you there?" "I'm here," the fox's voice rumbled, sounding tired. "Barely. Whatever that transit was, it drained us both. My chakra is what kept you from drowning and patched up the worst of it. We're weak, Naruto. Weaker than we've been since you were a child." Naruto swung his legs over the side of the cot, testing his balance. He was shaky, but he could stand. He looked down at his stomach. The 8 trigram seal was inert, no longer glowing. His connection to the vast well of Kurama's power was a mere trickle. He could still feel his own chakra, a deep and familiar lake within him, but it was sluggish. He tried to draw on nature energy, to enter sage mode, and felt nothing. It was like trying to breathe in a vacuum. The world around him was silent, devoid of the vibrant life energy he was so used to. The realization hit him with a cold dread that eclipsed any physical pain. He wasn't in the elemental nations anymore. "Who are you?" the woman asked, finally setting her staff aside. She stood up, crossing her arms. She was wearing a simple shirt and shorts, and a tattoo of a stylized pinwheel and a tangerine was visible on her left shoulder. "Naruto. Uzumaki Naruto," he said, his voice gaining some of its strength. He met her gaze directly. "Thank you for saving me. I owe you one." She raised a skeptical eyebrow. "Debts are expensive. I'm Nami, and before you start making promises, you should know where you are. This is the Konami Islands. Arlong's territory." The name meant nothing to him. But the way she said it, a mixture of bitterness and fear, told him everything. It was the same tone he'd heard people use when speaking of Gato, or Orochimaru, or pain. The tone reserved for a tyrant. "Arlong?" he asked, keeping his voice neutral. "A fish man. A pirate," she snapped, a flicker of raw anger in her eyes. "He and his crew run these islands. They demand a tribute from every single adult and child. You pay, You live. You don't. You die. Understand. Naruto's eyes narrowed slightly. He understood perfectly. It was the oldest, ugliest story in the world. And the Marines, the local leaders, he asked. Nami let out a short, sharp laugh devoid of any humor. The Marines are bought. Our leaders are dead or broken. There is only Arlong. She looked him up and down. You look like a fighter. But whatever you are, whatever you can do, it doesn't matter here. You can't beat him. Nobody can. Her words were a warning, but he heard the plea underneath them. Don't try. Don't give us hope just to have it crushed again. He'd heard that plea before, too. He simply nodded. I understand. For the next few days, Naruto stayed with Nami, first on her boat, then in a small house on the edge of Kokoyashi village, which she shared with a stern but kind woman with dark blue hair named Nojiko. He learned the rhythm of their lives, a rhythm dictated by fear. He saw the villagers force smiles, their eyes constantly flicking towards the sea, towards the distant, menacing structure they called Arlong Park. He saw the children playing, but their games were hushed, their laughter never quite reaching its full potential. He didn't speak of his past. He didn't demonstrate any of his abilities. He simply observed, listened, and helped. He repaired Nojiko's roof, his movements swift and sure. He helped tend the tangerine groves, his stamina seemingly endless. He was quiet, polite, and watchful. His silence unnerved Nami. She was used to braggarts and thugs. Naruto was something else entirely. He moved with a quiet confidence, an economy of motion that spoke of immense experience. There was a coiled stillness about him, the sense of a great power held in perfect, deliberate check. He would watch the villagers, his blue eyes soft with a profound empathy she couldn't fathom. He entered sage mode only once, in the quiet of the tangerine grove. The world snapped into focus, but it was alien. There was no chakra flowing through the trees or the earth. But there was something else. A different kind of energy. He could feel the collective emotion of the island, a vast, suffocating blanket of despair, punctuated by sharp spikes of Nami's hidden agony and Nojiko's weary resilience. It was a poison, and it was killing this place. You're not from around here, are you? Nojiko asked him one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset. Nami was in the village, a tent set to her shoulders. It was tribute day. No, Naruto admitted. I'm not. Yo, you have the eyes of someone who's seen a war, she said, not as a question. Naruto didn't reply. He just watched the path Nami had taken, his jaw tight. She thinks she can buy our freedom, Nojiko said softly, her voice thick with a sorrow so deep it was almost physical. She joined Arlong's crew, draws maps for him, steals from other pirates. She's been saving for 8 years. 100 million berries. That was the deal he made with her. The price for this village. Naruto turned to look at her, his expression unreadable. And you think he'll honor that deal? Nojiko's silence was answer enough. The breaking point came, as it always does, with an act of casual cruelty. A marine ship, led by a corrupt, rat-faced captain named Nezumi, landed on the island. They didn't go to Arlong Park. They went straight to Nami's tangerine grove. Acting on a tip, they confiscated her life's savings, the treasure she had bled and sacrificed for, buried beneath the trees. Naruto was there when she discovered it. He was 100 yards away, on a small hill, when he heard the scream. It wasn't a scream of fear, but of pure, soul-shattering agony and betrayal. He was by her side in a blur of motion. She was on her knees in the dirt, clawing at the empty hole, her body shaking with violent sobs. They took it, she choked out, her voice raw. He sent them. Arlong. He was never going to let us go. The hope that had sustained her for 8 years had been extinguished. And in its place was a bottomless abyss of despair. The villagers gathered, their faces ashen. They had known. Deep down, they had all known. They picked up rusted pitchforks and aged swords, their expressions grim. We have to fight, one of them said. It's better to die on our feet. You'll just get yourselves killed. Nami shrieked, scrambling to her feet. It's pointless. She was trying to save them, even now. Then, her eyes landed on the Arlong pirate's tattoo on her shoulder. The symbol of her enslavement, of her false hope. A guttural cry of self-loathing tore from her throat, and she pulled out a small knife, plunging it into her own arm, trying to carve the mark away. "Nami!" Nojiko screamed. But before anyone could move, a hand closed around her wrist. It was Naruto. His grip was impossibly strong, yet gentle. He didn't say a word. He just looked at her, his blue eyes burning with an intensity that silenced the entire clearing. The air around him seemed to grow heavy, charged with an unspoken promise. He carefully took the knife from her trembling fingers and tossed it aside. His gaze shifted from her wounded, bleeding arm to the path leading out of the village. It was then that a boy with a straw hat, a green-haired swordsman, a long-nosed liar, and a blonde cook came marching up the path. Ey looked beaten and bruised from some earlier fight, but their eyes were set with determination. The boy in the straw hat, Luffy, looked at Nami's tears, at her bleeding arm. "Nami," he said, his voice unusually serious. "You're our navigator." Nami finally broke. "Luffy," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. And then, the words she had been holding back for 8 long years came pouring out. "Help me." Luffy took off his precious straw hat and placed it on her head. He took a deep breath, his knuckles cracking. "Of course I will." He turned, a grin of pure, unadulterated fury on his face. "Let's go." "Which one is Arlong?" the swordsman, Zoro, asked, his hand on his swords. As they began their determined march towards Arlong Park, Naruto fell into step beside them. He hadn't said a word, but his presence had changed the atmosphere completely. The straw hats felt it, a shift in the pressure, a sudden drop in temperature. It was like walking next to the calm eye of a hurricane. Nami watched him go, her hand clutching the straw hat, her breath hitched in her throat. She looked at his back, broad and resolute. He hadn't made a grand declaration. He hadn't shouted or boasted. He had simply acted, and in his silence, she heard the loudest promise of all. Arlong Park was a monument to Fishman's supremacy. Arlong himself sat on his throne, a wide, toothy grin on his saw-nosed face, confident in his power. When Luffy kicked the gates off their hinges, his grin only widened. A human child, playing hero. It was amusing. "So, the little rubber human came to play," Arlong sneered. "And you brought your pathetic friends." His eyes scanned the group, Zoro, Sanji, Usopp, and then landed on Naruto. He paused. This one was different. There was a placid deadliness in his stance, a complete lack of fear or bravado in his eyes. It was the look of a wolf that had wandered into a dog kennel. "And who are you? I don't recognize you." Naruto didn't answer. He just looked past Arlong, his gaze sweeping over the terrified villagers being used as a gallery, at the structure itself. His sage mode was active, though there were no visible marks on his face. He didn't need the pigmenta Tian when he was only drawing on the barest dregs of the world's energy. It was enough. He could feel every fish man's position, could sense the flutter of their heartbeats, the arrogance, the cruelty. "Hey, I'm talking to you," Arlong barked, annoyed by the disrespect. He gestured lazily. "Moo, give our guests a proper welcome." A giant sea cow, already cowed and beaten by Luffy and Sanji before, roared and charged. But it wasn't aiming for the straw hats. It was aiming for the easiest target, Usopp. Usopp screamed, his legs frozen in terror. But the impact never came. Naruto hadn't seemed to move. One moment he was standing beside Zoro, the next he was in front of Usopp, one hand held up, palm flat against the massive sea beast's snout. Mumu, a creature that could crush ships, came to a dead, shuddering halt. Its momentum completely absorbed. There was no explosion of force, no grand gesture. It just stopped. Naruto's eyes met the beast's. It was full of fear and pain. He saw no malice in it. He just gave its snout a gentle pat. "Go on. Get out of here," he said, his voice calm. The sea cow whimpered, turned, and fled back to the ocean, crashing through a wall in its haste to escape. A stunned silence fell over Arlong Park. Even Luffy looked surprised. "What was that?" Sanji muttered, his cigarette nearly falling from his lips. Arlong was on his feet now, his grin gone. "So, the human has some tricks." His gaze hardened. "Kill him. Kill them all." The fishmen swarmed. Chu, the pufferfish fish man, took aim, puffing his cheeks to unleash his water bullets. Before he could fire, Naruto was a blur. A single, precise chop to the back of his neck, and Chu collapsed, unconscious. Kurubi, the fish-man karate expert, lunged forward, his fists a flurry of deadly strikes. Naruto weaved through them without effort, his movements a fluid dance of avoidance. He didn't even seem to be trying. He sidestepped a punch, redirected Kurubi's momentum, and a simple trip sent the martial artist sprawling. A quick, sharp kick to the temple, and he was out cold. Two of Arlong's officers, down in less than 5 seconds. It wasn't a fight, it was a culling. The other fish men hesitated. A flicker of genuine fear in their eyes. This human wasn't like the others. He wasn't strong. He was inevitable. Luffy cackled, stretching his arms. Awesome. He left the main guy for me. He rocketed forward. Gum gum pistol. Don't get in my way. Zoro yelled, drawing his swords and charging towards Hatchin, the 6-armed octopus fish man. Nami Swan's enemies are my enemies, Sanji declared, leaping into the fray with a series of devastating kicks. The chaos of the Straw Hats battle was a stark contrast to Naruto's quiet efficiency. He moved through the remaining fish man grunts like a phantom. He didn't use flashy techniques. A palm heel strike here, a sweep of the leg there. Each movement was perfectly timed, perfectly placed, using his sage-enhanced perception to anticipate their every attack. They were strong, far stronger than any normal human, but to a man who had fought demigods, they were painfully, almost pitifully, slow. Within a minute, the only ones left standing were Luffy, who was now engaged in a brutal slugfest with Arlong, and Naruto, who stood amidst a field of unconscious bodies. Arlong roared in fury, grabbing Luffy and slamming him into the ground. You worthless insects. He pulled out his massive blade, the Kuribaki, a sword made of linked, tooth-like segments. I'll tear you all to pieces. He lunged, not at Luffy, but at Naruto, recognizing him as the greater immediate threat. The Kuribaki swung in a devastating arc, fast enough to cleave a building in two. Naruto didn't dodge, he stood his ground, raising one hand. He channeled a sliver of his own chakra, reinforcing his body. The sound of steel on flesh was a sickening clang, as if the sword had struck an anvil. The Kuribaki shuddered to a halt, its edge just inches from Naruto's face. Stopped dead by his open palm. Arlong's eyes widened in disbelief. Impossible. Naruto's expression was cold, his eyes devoid of their usual warmth. You hurt people who couldn't fight back, he said, his voice low and dangerous. You took their hope. You made her cry. He tightened his grip. A network of fine cracks spread across the legendary blade. With a final, contemptuous squeeze, he clenched his fist. The Kuribaki shattered into 1,000 metal shards, falling to the ground like broken teeth. Arlong stared at his now empty hilt, then at Naruto, his mind unable to process what had just happened. That sword was an extension of his will, his strength. And this human had broken it. With his bare hand. For the first time in a very long time, Arlong felt fear. He let out a desperate, bestial roar and charged, abandoning all technique for pure, brute force. He was going to rip this human apart with his bare hands, his teeth. Naruto took a single step back, his right hand coming up. A faint, high-pitched whirring sound filled the air as blue energy began to spiral in his palm, condensing with a furious, contained energy. It was a perfect, beautiful sphere of swirling power. What is that? Arlong snarled, his charge not slowing. Naruto didn't answer. As Arlong came within range, he thrust his hand forward. Rasengan. The impact was absolute. There was no grand explosion, but a grinding, focused detonation of force. The Rasengan hit Arlong square in the chest, and it didn't send him flying. It drilled into him, carrying him backward, shredding his durable fish-man skin and muscle. It carved a deep, smoking trench 20 meters long through the concrete of his own park before finally dissipating, dropping Arlong's broken, unconscious form at the very end of it. Silence. The battle stopped. The remaining fish men, Hatchin included, stared in abject terror. Luffy, mid-punch, lowered his fist, his jaw hanging open. Zoro and Sanji froze, looking from the trench to the calm, blonde figure standing at its start. Naruto stood there for a moment, his hand still outstretched, the last wisps of blue chakra fading from his palm. He took a slow breath, the tension leaving his shoulders. He looked at the devastation he had caused, then at the villagers, who were staring at him with a mixture of awe and terror. He had ended the threat, but he had also revealed a power that didn't belong in their world. He turned and walked back towards the entrance, passing Luffy. "He's all yours now," he said quietly, gesturing to the ruins of Arlong Park. "Finish it." Luffy snapped out of his stupor, a wide grin spreading across his face. Shishishi. Right. He turned his attention to the building where Nami's cartography room was. "Nami, I'm gonna wreck your most hated room." Naruto walked out of the broken gates and didn't stop until he was at the shore, staring out at the endless, alien ocean. The celebration in Kokoyashi village was a thing of legend. Music, food, and laughter filled the air, genuine and unrestrained for the first time in 8 years. The Straw Hats were hailed as heroes, Luffy stuffing his face, Zoro drinking himself into a stupor, and Sanji fawning over every woman in sight. Naruto sat apart from the main bonfire, on the porch of Nojiko's house, nursing a simple cup of water. The joy of the village was a balm to his spirit, but it felt distant. He was an outsider, a ghost. He had won, but he was no closer to understanding where he was, or how to get home. Footsteps on the wooden stairs made him look up. It was Nami. She had changed into a simple dress. Her arm bandaged. The hateful tattoo was gone, covered by a clean dressing that Nojiko had applied. In its place, she had said, would be something new. Something that represented her. She sat down next to him. Not too close, but not too far. They sat in silence for a long time, watching the firelight dance on the faces of the celebrating villagers. "Thank you," she said finally, her voice soft. "They're your friends," Naruto replied, looking at the Straw Hats. "They would have done it without me." "Maybe," Nami conceded, "but not like that. What you did to Arlong, it wasn't a fight. It was an execution. You weren't even trying, were you?" Naruto was silent for a moment. He didn't deserve a fight, he said, his voice flat. He deserved an ending. Nami hugged her knees to her chest. "That power, what is it?" "It's not a devil fruit. It's called chakra," he said. It was the first time he had named it to anyone in this world. "It's the energy that connects all living things, where I'm from." Quote, "Where you're from," she repeated. "Another ocean, a different sea, a different world," he said, the words tasting like ash. "I think." Nami absorbed that, her sharp mind piecing together the impossible. The falling star, the healing, the power, it all made a terrible kind of sense. He was adrift, just like her. Only his ocean was infinitely larger. She saw the profound loneliness in his eyes. The same loneliness she had lived with for 8 years, and her heart ached for him. This man, who wielded the power of a god, was completely and utterly alone. "You have a place with us, you know," she said quietly. "On our crew, Luffy would have you in a heartbeat. We need a strong fighter. And, I wouldn't mind having you around." Naruto looked at her, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. A genuine, small smile touched his lips. "Thanks, Nami." She stood up, hesitating for a moment. Then, she reached into a bag she was carrying and pulled something out. It was a jacket. It was simple, made of durable canvas, but it was a bright, vibrant orange, with black trim on the shoulders and cuffs. A new spiral, mirroring the one on his stomach, was stitched neatly onto the back. "Your other one was ruined," she said, a faint blush on her cheeks. I had some material. I'm good with a needle." Naruto took the jacket. It felt solid, real. He ran his thumb over the stitching on the back. It was perfect, a symbol of his past, given a new life in this new world. By her, he stood up and shrugged it on. It fit perfectly. "It's perfect," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. He looked at her, and for the first time since he'd arrived, his smile reached his eyes. It was like the sun breaking through the clouds. "Thank you, Nami." Nami's heart did a strange little flip. "It's your color," she managed to say. "Well, I'm going to go get some more food." She practically fled back towards the party, her face burning. Naruto watched her go, a warmth spreading through his chest that had nothing to do with chakra. For the first time in this strange, broken world, he didn't feel quite so alone. Thousands of miles away, on the red line, in the hallowed Silent hulls of Pangaea Castle, a delicate instrument of sea stone and gold filigree shattered. 5 old men, the 5 elders, stared at the fragments of the celestial energy resonator. It had been silent for 800 years. Report, the elder with the long, white dreadlocks said, his voice a dry rustle of ancient paper. A figure in a pure white, featureless mask knelt before them. An energy signature of unprecedented scale, originating from the East Blue. It was not hockey. It was not a devil fruit awakening. The archives have no name for it. It registered on the scale of an ancient weapon. Then vanished. East Blue, the bald, sword-wielding elder mused. The weakest of the seas. An anomaly cannot be tolerated, said the blonde elder. The balance is too precious. Find the source. The tallest elder commanded, his voice echoing in the chamber. Send a warden. Scout. Assess. If it is a threat to the order, erase it. The white-masked figure bowed. By your will, Executor Silas has already been notified. He is dispatching an agent. The figure dissolved into the shadows, leaving the 5 rulers of the world to stare at their broken toy, their faces grim. A new, unknown piece was on the board, and it had to be removed. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. Whispers of a Kingdom. The Going Merry was a ship built for hopeful beginnings, not for carrying the weight of a trans-dimensional war hero. Yet, she sailed on, her lamb-headed figurehead smiling blithely at the endless blue. For the first few days after leaving the Konami Islands, a strange, almost reverent quiet had settled over the normally chaotic crew. Naruto had become an enigma they had begrudgingly accepted. Luffy, with his simple, animalistic understanding of people, knew only this: Naruto was strong, he had helped Nami. And he didn't try to hog all the food. Therefore, he was a good guy. Zoro, when not sleeping or training, would watch Naruto with a hawk-like intensity. He recognized a fellow predator, a warrior of a caliber he couldn't yet measure, and the swordsman in him hummed with a dangerous mix of respect and ambition. Sanji, while initially wary of another man who drew Nami's attention, couldn't deny the quiet power he projected. Plus, Naruto ate everything he cooked with genuine, heartfelt gratitude, which was the quickest way to the chef's good side. Usopp was simply terrified and awed in equal measure. Naruto, for his part, found a strange peace on the little ship. He'd spent his life in a world of forests and mountains, of villages hidden in leaves and sand. This constant, shifting expanse of water was alien, yet the sun on his face was the same, the wind in his hair was familiar. He spent hours at the bow, the new orange jacket Nami had made for him a comfortable weight on his shoulders. Simply watching the horizon, he was trying to feel the world, to understand its energy, but it remained stubbornly silent to his sage senses. It's not dead, Kurama R. umbled from the quiet depths of his mind. The fox was slowly regaining his strength, the trickle of his chakra a comforting warmth in Naruto's gut. It's just singing in a key you don't know. This world's nature energy is wild, untamed. It's all in the ocean, the sky, the storms. Not in the land. That explained why he couldn't draw it in. It was like trying to drink from a fire hose. He'd have to learn to adapt. To listen to this new song. You're quiet, a voice said, pulling him from his thoughts. Nami leaned against the railing beside him, a nautical chart held loosely in one hand. She was back to her usual self. Confident and sharp, but there was a new softness in her eyes when she looked at him. Lots to think about, he said, offering a small smile. Still trying to figure out how to get home? She asked gently. He nodded, his smile fading. Yeah, but I don't even know where to start. I was pulled through a tear in space. It wasn't a technique I can replicate. So, you're stuck here. It wasn't a question. Looks like it. For now. Nami was silent for a moment, her gaze on the horizon. Well, she said, a hint of her usual cheekiness returning, if you have to be stuck in a weird world. You could do a lot worse than being on a ship with the future king of the pirates. She nudged him with her elbow. And his brilliant, beautiful, expert navigator. Naruto chuckled, a genuine, relaxed sound. Can't argue with that. Their easy peace was shattered by a wall of red rock looming directly in their path, a mountain that seemed to defy the very existence of the ocean. Reverse mountain, Nami breathed, her eyes wide with a navigator's awe and fear. The entrance to the Grand Line. The ship was caught in a current, a rushing, roaring waterway that flowed up the mountain. Luffy was screaming with delight. Usopp was screaming with terror, and Zoro was, impossibly, still asleep. Everyone, hold on, Nami yelled, fighting with the rudder. The Mary groaned, wood creak. Ing as it was tossed about in the violent channel. A particularly nasty jolt sent Usopp tumbling toward the railing. Naruto moved without thinking. He grabbed the mast with one hand, his other flashing through a single hand seal. Shadow Clone Jutsu. 2 perfect copies of him appeared on deck. One grabbed Usopp, pulling him back to the center of the ship, while the other reinforced the rudder, helping Nami hold their course. Naruto himself pressed his hands against the deck, feeding a steady, controlled stream of chakra into the wood. The ship shuddered, then stabilized, the groans of the Hool quieting as a faint blue aura enveloped it, strengthening it against the crushing pressure of the current. They crested the peak in a spray of foam and then plunged down the other side, a gut-wrenching drop that ended in the vast, chaotic waters of the Grand Line. Before them, blocking the path, was a whale. A whale so colossally, impossibly huge that it made the tailed beasts of his world look like house pets. A mournful, deafening roar echoed across the water, a sound of such profound loneliness and grief that it struck Naruto to his very core. This creature, it's crying, he thought, his age senses flaring as he connected with the raw, overwhelming emotion. While Luffy was busy getting them swallowed by the whale, an event Naruto still couldn't quite believe had happened, he found the source of the grief. An old man named Crocus living inside the whale, and the story of a promise made to a pirate crew that never returned. It was a story Naruto understood all too well. Promises were the bedrock of his existence. He didn't interfere with Luffy's fight or his subsequent promise to Laboon. He just watched, a thoughtful expression on his face. This world, for all its madness, seemed to run on the same fuel as his own. Promises, dreams, and the unbreakable bonds between comrades. Their next stop was an island of cheerful greetings and bountiful feasts. Whiskey Peak. It was night when they arrived, and the entire town seemed to be out to celebrate their arrival, hailing them as heroes. Free food, free booze, a party in their honor. The Straw Hats, minus a wary Nami and a suspicious Zoro, dove in headfirst. Naruto took a plate of food but stood at the edge of the festivities, his eyes missing nothing. He appeared relaxed, but internally, he was on high alert. Something's wrong, Kurama. I feel it too, the fox grumbled. These people, their smiles don't reach their eyes. There's a scent in the air. Bloodlust, hidden under cheap perfume and ale. Naruto's sage mode, though still unable to draw power, gave him a preternatural clarity. He could hear the 2 quick heartbeats of their hosts. He could feel the cold steel of swords hidden under cloaks. He saw the way the mayor, a ridiculously large man with a green afro, exchanged subtle, predatory glances with a woman in a cowboy hat. This wasn't a welcome party. It was a trap. The villagers weren't villagers, they were hunters. And the Straw Hats were the prey. He saw Zoro, sitting on a rooftop, having come to the same conclusion through pure instinct and paranoia. Their eyes met across the square, a silent, mutual understanding passing between them. Let them have their fun. We'll handle this. As the Straw Hats drank themselves into a stupor, Naruto discreetly created a dozen shadow clones. They dispersed into the darkness. Silent phantoms mapping the town, identifying every hidden combatant, every escape route, every ambush point. The information flowed back to him, painting a perfect, 3-dimensional picture of the battlefield in his mind. 100 bounty hunters, all part of some organization called Baroque Works. Their targets, the entire crew, but especially Monkey D. Luffy, for his new 30 million berry bounty. When Luffy, Usopp, and Sanji were soundly asleep, the facade dropped. The villagers drew their weapons, their friendly smiles twisting into cruel sneers. It's about time, Zoro yawned, stretching. I was getting bored. He stood up, 3 swords ready. Before the bounty hunters could even react, Naruto was a blur of motion at the center of the square. Everyone, he said, his voice carrying easily over the sudden silence, go to sleep. He clapped his hands together. In the shadows of the alleys and rooftops, his clones moved as one. It was over in an instant. There were no flashy jutsus, no explosions. Just the dull, rhythmic thud of bodies hitting the ground. The clones, moving with speed and precision that was utterly imperceptible to the normal eye, delivered perfectly calculated nerve strikes to the back of each bounty hunter's neck. 100 men and women collapsed like puppets with their strings cut, unconscious before they even knew they were under attack. The square, once filled with menace, was now littered with sleeping bodies. Zoro stared, his one good eye wide. He hadn't even seen Naruto move. He'd blinked, and it was over. Show off, the swordsman grumbled. Though there was no heat in it. It was then that the real threat emerged. The mayor, Agaram, fell to his knees, his ridiculous wig falling off to reveal the carefully styled hair of a royal guardsman. Wait, please, you don't understand, he pleaded. We meant you no harm. It was all an act to protect our precious princess. He pointed a shaky finger at the woman in the cowboy hat, who was staring at Naruto with undisguised shock. She sighed, removing her hat. So much for the subtle approach, Agaram. Before they could explain further, two new figures landed in the square with theatrical flair. A man with a garish 5 on his coat and a young woman in a lemon-themed dress. Mr. 5 and Miss Valentine, agents of Baroque Works, the woman formerly known as Miss Wednesday whispered, her face pale. They're here to eliminate the traitors. Traitors, Mr. 5 sneered, flicking a booger from his nose. That's a nice way of putting it. You learned the identity of our boss, Mr. 0. That's a death sentence. He pointed a finger at the woman. Kilo bomb. Miss Valentine floated into the air. He then took a deep breath. Nose fancy cannon. He flicked another booger, which shot towards the woman like a bullet. This entire display was so absurd, so utterly bizarre, that for a split second, Naruto just stared. A man who weaponized his snot. This world was truly insane. But the threat was real. The projectile was explosive. He didn't wait. He didn't analyze. He acted. He vanished from his spot, a flicker of orange in the moonlight. He appeared in front of the woman, wadding the incoming projectile out of the air with the back of his hand. It flew into a nearby building and detonated with a powerful boom, blowing a hole in the wall. He then turned his attention to the two assassins. His expression one of mild annoyance. That's disgusting, he stated flatly. Miss Valentine, still floating in the air, shrieked and dropped, aiming to crush him with her increased weight. 10,000 kilo press. Naruto didn't even look up. He simply held a hand out. She landed on his palm with the force of a falling safe. He didn't budge. He didn't even grunt. He just held her there, 100 feet in the air. On the palm of one hand, as if she weighed nothing at all. Her eyes were wide with terror and disbelief. Mr. 5, enraged, charged him. I am a bomb human. Every part of my body is a bomb. He screamed, his whole body primed to explode on contact. Naruto sighed. With Miss Valentine still balanced precariously on one hand, he met Mr. 5's charge. He didn't punch. He didn't kick. He simply moved his free hand in a blur, striking 5 pressure points on Mr. 5's body with his fingertips before the man could even register his movement. The assassin froze mid-stride, his eyes rolling back in his head as his entire nervous system seized up. He collapsed to the ground, twitching and unconscious, his explosive power completely neutralized. Naruto gently lowered his other hand, and Miss Valentine slid to the ground, landing in an ungraceful heap. She was trembling too hard to even stand. The whole encounter had taken less than 10 seconds. The woman, the princess, stared at him, her mouth agape. Agaram was speechless. Zoro sheathed his swords with a soft click, a slow grin spreading across his face. This was getting interesting. Now, Naruto said, turning to the woman, his demeanor shifting back from deadly weapon to concerned stranger. You were saying something about a princess. Her name was Vivi Nefertari, and she was the princess of the Alabasta Kingdom. The man they called Mr. 0 was none other than one of the 7 warlords of the sea, Sir Crocodile, a national hero in her country. He was the secret leader of Baroque Works, and he was orchestrating a civil war to destabilize the kingdom so he could seize control. They spoke in the hold of the Going Merry as they fled Whiskey Peak, Agaram having created a decoy to draw the other Baroque Works agents away. Nami, now awake and briefed on the situation, was at the helm, her expression grim. Vivi told her story with a desperate passion, her hands clenched in her lap. She spoke of a nation turning on its benevolent king. Of manufactured drought, of a rebel army led by a man who was once her childhood friend. It was a story of insidious betrayal and political conspiracy. Naruto listened, his expression serious, his gaze unwavering. He didn't interrupt, he just let her pour it all out. Her fear, her anger, her crushing sense of responsibility. When she was finished, her shoulders slumped in exhaustion, he finally spoke. His voice was quiet, but it resonated with an unshakable conviction. A princess trying to save her people from a war they don't understand, he said, his eyes distant for a second. As if looking into his own past. He saw the land of waves, the noble sacrifice of Haku and Zabuza. He saw Gaara, a lonely leader crushed by his village's fear. He saw the faces of the daimyo, so often disconnected from the struggles of their people. I've seen that before. He leaned forward slightly, his blue eyes locking onto hers. There was no boastfulness, no bravado. Just a simple, powerful statement of fact. I won't let you fail. Tears welled in Vivi's eyes. In her world, help always came with a price. Pirates wanted treasure. The world government wanted political capital. But this man, this stranger from another world, offered his godlike power without condition. His promise wasn't transactional, it was absolute. It was the word of a man who understood the weight of her burden because he had carried one just like it. A profound sense of relief and hope, emotions she hadn't dared to feel for months, washed over her. Thank you, she whispered, the words carrying the weight of her entire kingdom. Nami, standing in the doorway, had heard the entire exchange. She saw the look of utter devotion on Vivi's face, the quiet strength in Naruto's. A strange, unfamiliar pang tightened in her chest. It wasn't exactly jealousy. It was more protective. Naruto was theirs. He was part of their crew, their strange little family. Now this princess was here, with her noble cause and her beautiful, tear-filled eyes, leaning on him. And he, with his hero complex the size of the Grand Line, was letting her. She pressed her lips into a thin line and turned back to the helm. Her grip on the wood a little tighter than necessary. The journey to Alabasta was a perilous one. Baroque Works agents were everywhere. They had a brief, bizarre stop on an island of prehistoric dinosaurs called Little Garden, where Naruto was more fascinated by the giant creatures than threatened by them. It was there they had their first true test since leaving Whiskey Peak. A marine battleship, flying the flag of a vice admiral, intercepted them. This was no bumbling Captain Nezumi. The ship was pristine, the crew disciplined, moving with a chilling, silent efficiency. The man who stood on the deck was tall and lean, with silver hair and cold, analytical gray eyes. He introduced himself as Vice Admiral Kestrel. Straw Hat Luffy. Kestrel's voice was calm, cultured. Your crew is under arrest for conspiring with the known Baroque Works agent, Miss All Sunday. He was referring to a woman they had met briefly, who had given them an eternal pose to a different island, a trap Vivi had thankfully recognized. And you, his eyes zeroed in on Naruto, are an unregistered variable. You will surrender for assessment. Luffy, naturally, refused. I'm not going anywhere with you. And he's my nakama. Kestrel sighed, a sound of profound disappointment. Predictable. He didn't order his men to fire. He simply raised a hand. The space between the two ships seemed to warp. The ocean buckled, not with a wave, but as if the geometry of the world had been momentarily twisted. The Mary lurched violently, throwing everyone off balance. This isn't a devil fruit power, Kurama noted, his senses on high alert. It feels artificial, like a cheap imitation of a Rinnegan ability. Naruto was already moving, planting his feet and channeling chakra to stabilize the deck. Zoro, Sanji, protect the ship. Luffy, with me. He and Luffy launched themselves across the gap. Kestrel didn't flinch. He met their charge alone. Luffy's fist stretched, aiming a gum-gum pistol at his face. Kestrel sidestepped, his movement unnaturally fluid, almost like he was sliding through space. He tapped Luffy's extended arm with a single finger, and Luffy cried out, his arm going numb and retracting limply. Naruto came in from the other side, a Rasengan already forming in his hand. But as he lunged, Kestrel made a subtle gesture, and the world seemed to tilt. For a split second, Naruto's perception of distance was thrown off. He overshot his target by a foot, the Rasengan harmlessly churning the air. "Your energy control is remarkable," Kestrel observed, his tone that of a scientist studying a specimen. "But it is unfocused. Raw. What is its source?" He pulled a strange, black, crystalline blade from his belt. It didn't reflect any light. They engaged in a frantic, disorienting battle. Kestrel didn't fight like a marine or a pirate. He fought like an assassin, using his spatial warping ability to create false openings and throw off Naruto's aim. He wasn't trying to win, he was gathering data. He parried a chakra-infused punch, his black blade absorbing the energy without a scratch. He dodged a kick and made a note of Naruto's physical speed. "Wind style. Rasenshuriken," Naruto yelled, creating his signature jutsu. The screeching shuriken of wind flew across the deck. Kestrel's eyes widened slightly behind his cool facade. He made a sharp, cutting motion with his hand, and a veer of space seemed to fold in on itself, swallowing the Rasenshuriken whole. It vanished without a trace. "Fascinating," Kestrel murmured. "Elemental manipulation on a catastrophic scale." He had what he needed. He pressed a device on his wrist. Subject is codenamed Maelstrom. Confirmed energy manipulator, non-Haki, non-devil fruit. Possesses superhuman strength, speed, and regenerative abilities. Capable of creating solid-state duplicates and manifesting localized, high-yield destructive phenomena. Classification: existential threat. Recommend immediate escalation. With that, he performed another spatial slide, appearing back on his own ship. "We will meet again, Maelstrom," he called out, his voice calm as ever. The marine ship turned, its cannons never having fired, and sailed away, leaving a confused and unnerved crew behind. "What the hell was that?" Sanji asked, lighting a shaky cigarette. "He wasn't a marine," Naruto said, his eyes narrowed on the retreating vessel. "He was a spy, and a damn good one. He had fought shinobi from the Foundation, Danzo's elite Anbu." Kestrel had the same cold, clinical detachment. The encounter left a sour taste in his mouth. He was being watched, hunted, and not just by pirates. Their escape led them to the snow-covered Drum Island, where Wapol, the gluttonous former king, was causing trouble. The immediate problem, however, was Nami. The chaotic climate changes of the Grand Line had taken their toll, and she had fallen gravely ill with a fever that raged through her body. Seeing her pale and shivering, her usual fiery spirit dimmed, stirred a fierce protectiveness in Naruto. He and Luffy carried her through the frozen wilderness, climbing the sheer cliff face of a mountain to reach the island's only doctor, a witch, who lived at the peak. The cold was biting, but Naruto barely felt it. Kurama's chakra, now slowly regenerating, kept him warm from the inside out. He watched Luffy, struggling but determined, carrying Nami on his back, and felt a surge of respect for the rubber captain. They found the doctor, a small, blue-nosed reindeer named Tony Chopper who could talk and change his form thanks to the human fruit. He was a brilliant physician, but skittish and terrified of humans after a lifetime of being called a monster. While Chopper worked on Nami, Naruto sat with her. She was unconscious, her breathing shallow. He placed a hand on her forehead, feeling the heat of the fever. He couldn't heal her. His medical ninjutsu was rudimentary at best, but he could offer comfort. He channeled a tiny, gentle stream of his own chakra, weaving it into a warm, soothing blanket of energy that enveloped her. It wouldn't cure the disease, but it would ease her suffering, calming the violent shivers and lowering her temperature just enough to give Chopper's medicine a better chance to work. He also found a kindred spirit in Chopper. "They call you a monster, huh?" Naruto said quietly, finding the reindeer hiding behind a doorway. Chopper flinched. "Go away. I'm not a monster." "I know," Naruto said. He pointed to his own stomach. "I've got one of my own. A big, grumpy, nine-tailed fox. People used to look at me the same way they look at you. With fear. But they were wrong. You're not a monster. You're a doctor. A kind one." Chopper stared at him, tears welling in his big eyes. It was the first time anyone, other than his mentor Hiralik, had seen him for what he was, not what he looked like. When Nami finally woke up, the first thing she felt was a gentle, comforting warmth that seemed to radiate from her very bones. The first thing she saw was Naruto, sitting by her bedside, his head nodding with exhaustion, but his hand still resting near hers, a faint golden aura connecting them. With Chop, her officially joining the crew after they sent Wapol flying, and Nami on the road to recovery, their resolve was hardened. They set sail from Drum Island, the cherry blossoms of Hiruluk's final miracle falling around them like pink snow. Their destination was set, Alabasta. On the deck, Vivi approached Naruto as he consulted a map with Nami. "We'll need a plan," Vivi said, her voice filled with a new determination. "Crocodile is smart. He controls the capital, the port towns. He'll be expecting us." "We won't go where he's expecting," Naruto said, his finger tracing a line through the vast desert on the map. "We'll be a ghost, a rumor. We'll hit him where he's weakest, dismantle his operations from the inside out. He's built a house of cards. We just need to find the right one to pull." Nami watched them, their heads bent over the map, a princess and a sage planning a war. She saw the easy confidence between them, a shared language of strategy and purpose. The protective pang in her chest returned, sharper this time. But it was mingled with something else, pride. This was her crew, her friend, and they were sailing to save a kingdom. Meanwhile, in a dark, undisclosed location, Admiral Kestrel stood before a holographic projection of a man seated in shadow. The man's face was invisible, but his presence was crushing. "The report is confirmed, Executor Silas," Kestrel said. "The Maelstrom is an entity of unknown origin with power that defies our current classification systems. His psychological profile suggests a deeply ingrained protective instinct, focused on his immediate companions. He is emotionally driven, but tactically brilliant. He is not a mindless beast. He is a thinking weapon." The shadowed figure, Executor Silas, was silent for a long moment. "A thinking weapon is the most dangerous kind," he said finally, his voice a cold, flat monotone. "The warlord crocodile is a useful, if crude, instrument. Let him be the anvil. Let him test the Maelstrom's limits. Record everything. We need to know exactly what it will take to unmake this anomaly." The projection faded, leaving Kestrel alone in the dark. He looked down at his black blade. It had absorbed a fraction of Naruto's Rasengan. The crystal was humming, vibrating with an energy it had never known. An energy that felt, impossibly, alive. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The Archaeologist and the Crocodile. The heat of Alabasta was a physical presence. It rose in shimmering waves from the endless dunes, a silent, oppressive force that bleached the sky to a pale, hazy blue. For the Straw Hats, it was a brutal introduction to a desert kingdom. For Naruto, it was a faint, nostalgic echo of the Land of Wind. The air was different, heavier, but the sun was just as unforgiving. They landed at the port of Nanohana, a town bustling with a tense, fragile energy. Naruto, his sage mode active, felt the pervasive unease. He tasted the bitterness in the air, a compound of fear, anger, and a growing, desperate thirst. Crocodile's plan was insidious. By hoarding the nation's reign with his secret dance powder and framing the king for its use, he hadn't just created a drought, he had poisoned the very soul of the country. Their arrival was explosive. Luffy, with his unerring talent for finding trouble, immediately ran into Smoker, the tenacious marine captain from Logatown. The chase that ensued was a chaotic mess of smoke and rubber. But it served a purpose. It was a diversion. While the Marines were occupied, the rest of the crew, guided by Vivi, slipped into the city's labyrinthine alleys. Naruto walked beside Vivi, his presence a calm anchor in the swirl of her anxiety. "The rebel army is gathering at Yuba, an oasis town to the west," she explained, her voice low. "It's led by my friend, Koza. If I can reach him, if I can show him the truth about the rain-summoning powder, maybe I can stop them before they march on the capital." "He won't believe you," Naruto said, not unkindly. "Not at first. A man leading a rebellion has to believe in his cause. To admit he's wrong is to admit that the suffering of his followers was for nothing." Vivi's face fell. "Then what do? We don't try to stop the river," Naruto replied, his eyes scanning the rooftops, his senses spread thin across the city. "We divert it. We give them a new target. Crocodile." It was then that he felt it. A flicker of a presence. So faint and fleeting he almost missed it. Someone was watching them, not with the aggressive intent of a bounty hunter or the discipline of a marine. This was a cool, detached observation. Like a scholar reading a book. He glanced up at a shaded balcony and saw a silhouette, a woman in a wide-brimmed hat. She met his gaze for a fraction of a second before melting back into the shadows. Her scent, a faint trace of desert flowers and old paper, lingered in the air. Kurama, that woman, I felt her, the fox confirmed. There's a deep, ancient sorrow clinging to her. The kind that comes from watching worlds die. The thought was so jarring that Naruto paused, a frown creasing his brow. Before he could dwell on it, their immediate problems multiplied. A man with a cannon for a head and a woman riding a giant vulture. Mr. One and Miss Doublefinger, two of Baroque Works' top officer agents, had found them. No, that wasn't right. They had been waiting. So, Mr. One said, his voice as dull and flat as the steel his body could become, the princess and her pet freaks. The boss wants you eliminated. It's just a job. Zoro stepped forward, a savage grin on his face. Finally, a real challenge. He drew his swords. His eyes locked on the man made of blades. Sanji moved to intercept Miss Doublefinger, his leg a blur. I can't bring myself to harm a lady, he sighed dramatically, but I can certainly keep her busy. While his friends engaged in their desperate battles, Naruto's focus was elsewhere. He had a war to fight, not a duel. Vivi, go, he ordered. Get to Yuba, we'll handle this and catch up. Vivi hesitated, torn. She's right, a new voice said. The woman from the balcony was there, standing at the end of the alley as if she had materialized from the heat haze itself. Nico Robin, Miss All Sunday. The vice president of Baroque Works. You should run, princess. Your cause is already lost. She looked at Naruto, a small, enigmatic smile on her lips. And you, the maelstrom, you're the wild card in this game, aren't you? I wonder what you'll do when you realize all the cards are stacked against you. Naruto's sage senses screamed at him. This woman wasn't just an observer. The sorrow around her was a cloak, hiding a terrifyingly sharp intellect and a power that felt slippery, unnatural. He saw dozens of arms sprout from the walls around them, a disorienting, horrifying display. Go, Naruto yelled, pushing Vivi toward the other end of the alley. Now, he created a dozen shadow clones. They didn't attack Robin. Instead, they formed a perimeter, their purpose clear, to contain. To observe, to buy time. The real Naruto vanished, not with a burst of speed, but by simply melting into the city's chaos, already working on a larger strategy. Robin watched him go, her smile widening slightly. She flicked her wrist, and the arms sprouting from the walls simply folded away. How curious, she murmured to herself. This man was different. He hadn't tried to fight her head-on. He hadn't threatened or boasted. He had assessed the situation and immediately prioritized his objective, sacrificing a direct confrontation for a tactical advantage. He thought like a general, not a brawler. This was far more interesting than Crocodile's brutish power plays. The desert was a vast, unforgiving opponent. The journey to Yuba was a trial by fire. But for Naruto, it was a canvas. While the others struggled with the heat and the sand, he was in his element. He used his clones for everything. 2 clones, disguised as traitors, traveled ahead of the group, outing the path and gathering intelligence. They listened to whispers in ramshackle oasis bars, tales of rebel movements and the growing desperation of the people. They learned of the Sandora lizards, giant reptiles that Crocodile's forces were using for transport. They learned the locations of Baroque Works, hidden supply caches. 4 more clones, moving under the cover of night, became saboteurs. They didn't engage in fights. They were ghosts. They contaminated water stores with harmless but foul-tasting herbs, making them undrinkable for Crocodile's troops. They spooked the Sandora lizards, sending them scattering into the deep desert. They replaced the gunpowder in ammunition boxes with sand. They were 1,000 tiny cuts, bleeding Crocodile's logistics dry without a single drop of spilled blood. The information flowed back to Naruto in a constant stream, updating his mental map of the conflict. He was fighting a modern war in a world of pirates and swashbucklers. He was dismantling an organization by severing its tendons. Vivi watched him, amazed. One minute he was walking beside her, offering her water from his own seemingly endless supply. The next, he would pause, his eyes unfocused, and say, "There's a Billions platoon 2 clicks north of here, changing their route. They're heading for the Kateria Oasis. Tell Nami to steer us southwest. He saw the entire battlefield as if he were floating above it. They finally reached Yuba, a dry, windswept husk of a town. The oasis was gone, buried by sandstorms. And so was the rebel army. They had already moved on, marching toward their destiny in the capital. Alubarna, Koza, driven by desperation, had pushed ahead. Vivi's despair was palpable. She had failed. We're too late, she whispered, falling to her knees in the sand. An old man, Toto, Koza's father, offered them water from a hole he had been digging for years, a single act of defiance against the desert. It was this small act, this stubborn refusal to give up, that seemed to galvanize Naruto. It's not over, he said, pulling Vivi to her feet. He looked at the sky, at the unnaturally clear, cloudless expanse. He's in Alubarna, isn't he? Crocodile. He's sitting there, watching his plan come together. Yes, Vivi said, the final battle will be there. The royal army and the rebel army will destroy each other, and he will step in as the hero. Good, Naruto said, a cold, hard glint in his eye. It's time we met the man in charge. He looked at the straw hats, their faces grim but resolute. Luffy, you're the captain. You get the final boss. The rest of us, we have a war to stop. He turned to Nami. Get us to Alubarna, fast. Nami, using the information Naruto's clones had gathered, charted the quickest, safest route. They rode across the desert on giant desert crabs. A bizarre but effective mode of transport, arriving at the capital just as the two armies were converging on the city. The scene was one of controlled chaos. The royal army, led by Chaka, one of the kingdom's two head guards, held the city's defenses. The rebel army, a massive, desperate force, was camped outside, ready to storm the gates. Baroque Works agents were hidden on both sides, ready to fan the flames and ensure maximum bloodshed. It's a powder keg, Sanji muttered. Then we need to get rid of the match, Naruto said. He began issuing orders with a quiet, calm authority that no one questioned. Nami, Usopp, you're with me. Your job is disruption. Vivi, you have to get into the city square. Your voice is the only one that can truly stop this. Find a high place and be ready. Zoro, Sanji, you're the vanguard. Clear a path for Vivi. Break their command structure. Target the officers. And what about me? Luffy asked, cracking his knuckles. Naruto pointed towards the royal palace. He'll be there, waiting. Go find him, and kick his sandy ass. Luffy grinned. Got it. With their mission set, they split up. Naruto, Nami, and Usopp used the city's sewer system, a route one of the clones had discovered, to move unseen behind the rebel lines. They emerged near the rebel army's rear flank. Okay, Naruto said, turning to his two companions. Usopp, you're a sniper. I want you to use your special ammunition, your smoke stars, your stink stars, anything that causes confusion, and fire it into the center of both armies. Don't hit anyone, just create chaos, make them blind, make them question what they're seeing. Usopp, terrified but resolute, nodded. The great Captain Usopp can do that. Nami, Naruto continued, you're clim-attacked. You can create mirages, right? Yeah, but they're not very convincing up close, she said. They don't have to be. From a distance, in the chaos, it'll be enough. Create mirages of reinforcements. Royal troops appearing on the rebel flank. Rebel troops appearing behind the royal lines. Anything to make their commanders hesitate, to break their formations. Nami's eyes lit up with understanding. This wasn't about fighting. It was psychological warfare. What about you? She asked. Naruto smiled, a feral, dangerous expression. I'm the main event. He made a single hand seal. The air around him shimmered, and in a series of smokeless puffs, 1,000 shadow clones appeared, a silent, disciplined army of orange jackets flooding the plains behind the rebel forces. The scale of it was breathtaking. My clones will not kill anyone, Naruto instructed the original, who stood beside Nami. They will disarm, disable, and disrupt. We are not here to win a battle. We are here to stop one. The clones surged forward. It was a wave of pure, non-lethal force. They swept through the rear of the rebel army, their movements a synchronized ballet of controlled violence. They didn't punch or kick. They used precise chops to wrists. making soldiers drop their swords. They used leg sweeps to take out dozens at a time. They dismantled catapults and siege towers with methodical efficiency. Panic erupted. The rebel commanders, seeing an entire army appear from nowhere, screamed for their rear guard, but the rear guard was already neutralized, tied up with their own belts and ropes. At the same time, Usopp's smoke bombs and Nami's mirages hit the front lines. The battlefield dissolved into a confused mess. Soldiers were swinging at phantoms, commanders were shouting contradictory orders. The charge on the city faltered. Meanwhile, in the capital, Zoro and Sanji were a whirlwind of destruction, cutting a path for Vivi towards the central plaza. Luffy, having been intercepted and defeated once by Crocodile already, was now making his second, more determined, charge toward the warlord. Naruto felt a surge of pride. His friends were incredible, but his work wasn't done. He had to find the source of the coming explosion. A detail a clone had overheard from a panicked Baroque Works agent. He left the management of the clone army to a primary clone and sprinted into the city. His senses, honed by years of war, led him to the city's clock tower. And there, he found her again. Nico Robin. She was standing beside a massive cannon, Mr. Seven and Miss Father's Day setting the fuse. It was aimed at the plaza, where the two armies were now clashing in a disorganized, confused brawl. A single shot into that chaos would cause thousands of deaths and make reconciliation impossible. I wondered when you'd get here, Robin said. Her tone unreadable, she gestured to the scene below. It's all pointless, you know. They will fight. People always do. Your efforts are just a delay of the inevitable. Naruto ignored her, his eyes on the cannon. There's a bomb in that tower, isn't there? The cannon shot is just a distraction. Robin's smile wavered for the first time. Her intelligence network was vast, but she hadn't known he would figure that out. Very clever, Maelstrom. Yes, a bomb powerful enough to wipe out this entire plaza and everyone in it. Move, Naruto said, his voice dropping to a low, deadly growl. Instead of moving, Robin did something unexpected. She turned to Mr. Seven and Miss Father's Day. The boss has a new order. The plan has changed. The detonation is to be called off. The two lesser agents stared at her, confused. Then at Crocodile, who had appeared on a nearby rooftop, watching the scene unfold. Crocodile gave a subtle, almost imperceptible shake of his head. The original plan was still in motion. It was a test for Robin, her loyalty versus her curiosity. Robin sighed, a sound of weary resignation. A pity. She turned her back on Naruto, walking toward the edge of the tower. Do what you must. Naruto didn't have time to decipher her strange behavior. The fuse on the cannon was lit. He moved, a blur of orange. He disarmed the two agents with non-lethal strikes that left them unconscious. He then grabbed the cannon and, with a surge of raw strength, wrenched it from its mountings, pointing it straight up at the sky. It fired, the cannonball soaring harmlessly into the air. He then turned his attention to the tower itself. His sage mode pinpointed the bomb's location, the very top of the spire. He had seconds. He didn't have time to disarm it. He had to contain it. He flew through hand seals, a sequence so fast his hands were just a blur. Sage art. Gracious deity gates. 10 massive, red torii gates materialized from the sky, slamming down around the top of the clock tower. One after another, each one reinforcing the last. They interlocked, forming a cage of immense spiritual power. A moment later, the bomb detonated. The tower shook, and a deafening, muffled crump echoed from within the cage. The gates glowed, straining against the force, but they held. The explosion was contained. Down below, the plaza fell silent. The fighting stopped. As everyone stared up at the impossible sight of the giant red gates that had saved them all. In that moment of stunned silence, Vivi's voice, amplified by a garum and a borrowed megaphone, rang out across the square. Everyone, stop. You are being deceived. She told them everything. About Crocodile, about Baroque Works, about the dance powder. And then, as if on cue, the sky, which had been clear for years, darkened. It began to rain. A gentle, cleansing rain. It was the result of Luffy's final, desperate battle with Crocodile, a punch so powerful it had sent the warlord rocketing through bedrock and into the sky. The shockwave disrupting the atmospheric pressure he had been manipulating. The rain fell on the faces of the soldiers, royal and rebel alike. They dropped their weapons, tears mixing with the raindrops. The war was over. Naruto stood on the clock tower, the Torii gates fading back into nothingness. He looked down at the celebrating city, a small, tired smile on his face. He had done it. He had stopped a war without taking a single life. He then looked for the woman, Nico Robin. She was gone. The final confrontation happened deep beneath the city, in the collapsing ruins of the royal tomb where the poneglyph detailing the location of the Pluton weapon was hidden. Luffy had defeated Crocodile, but the warlord, in a final act of spite, had triggered the tomb's self-destruct mechanism. As the Straw Hats scrambled to escape the crumbling ruins, Naruto, guided by Kurama's senses, went deeper. He found her there, leaning against the poneglyph, a small vial of poison in her hand. Nico Robin. She was wounded, impaled by Crocodile's hook in his final moments of rage. She looked up at him, her expression not of fear, but of calm, weary acceptance. I gave the king tea. He antidote for the poison he was afflicted with, she said, her voice weak. My final act. I have no reason to live. My dream is dead. Crocodile couldn't read this stone. I lied to him, and the world. Government will hunt me forever just for the crime of existing. So, I will end it here. She brought the vial to her lips. A hand gently took it from her. It was Naruto. He was covered in dust and grime, his orange jacket torn. But his eyes were clear. No, he said simply. She stared at him, bewildered. Why? Why do you care? I am your enemy. I worked with the man who tried to destroy this country, who tried to kill your friends. You also told the king how to save himself, Naruto countered. He looked at her, and his sage mode wasn't sensing an enemy. It was sensing the same thing Kurama had. A soul so burdened with sorrow it had forgotten its own weight. A loneliness so profound it had become a part of her. He had seen that look before. In Gaara, in Nagato, in himself, in the dark days of his childhood. I don't care who you were, he said, his voice soft but firm. I only care about what I see right now. He crouched down in front of her, meeting her gaze. The tomb was shaking violently. Chunks of the ceiling crashing down around them. They were running out of time. Why are you saving me? She asked again, her voice barely a whisper. Naruto gave her a small, sad smile. Becca, you didn't look like you wanted to die, he said, his words cutting through her decades of cynicism. You looked like you'd forgotten how to live. And everyone deserves the chance to remember. He effortlessly lifted her into his arms. She was light, fragile. He turned and sprinted through the collapsing tomb, his speed a blur, dodging falling pillars and leaping over chasms that opened in the floor. Robin held on, her mind reeling. His words echoed in her head. Forgotten how to live. He saw her. He didn't see the demon of Ohara, or Miss All Sunday, or a living key to a forgotten history. He saw her, a person. He burst out into the desert sunlight just as the entrance to the tomb collapsed behind them, sealing it forever. He carried her to where the rest of the crew was waiting, their faces a mixture of relief and confusion. He gently set her down. Nami and Vivi rushed to his side, their faces etched with worry. Naruto, are you okay? Nami asked, her eyes scanning him for injuries. We thought you were buried in there. Vivi added, her hand instinctively going to his arm. I'm fine, he said, then gestured to Robin, who was staring at the three of them, a complex, unreadable emotion on her face. She needs a doctor. Quote, later, after the celebrations had died down and the kingdom was beginning to heal, the Straw Hats prepared to leave. Vivi stood before them at the docks, dressed in her royal finery. The choice had been agonizing, but her duty was to her people. She couldn't go with them. She shared tearful goodbyes with everyone, but when she got to Naruto, words failed her. He had saved her country. He had saved her. She started, but couldn't continue. Naruto simply smiled. I know, he said. He understood duty. He understood sacrifice. Be a good queen, Vivi. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. She wanted to say more. She wanted to tell him that the respect she felt for him had blossomed into something deeper, something that made her heart ache. But the words wouldn't come. As the Going Merry pulled away from the shore, the crew turned their backs, showing the X mark on their arms, the silent symbol of their enduring friendship. Naruto stood at the stern, watching Alabasta shrink into the distance. He felt a presence beside him. It was Nami, and on his other side, Robin. She had, against all odds and with Luffy's simple-minded acceptance, joined their crew. Nami looked from Naruto to Robin, who was watching Naruto with an intense, analytical curiosity. The air between the three of them was thick with unspoken things. Nami's protective affection, now tinged with a new awareness of this dark, mysterious woman. Robin's intellectual fascination, now complicated by a profound, world-shattering gratitude. You risked your life for her, Nami said quietly, her eyes on Naruto. It wasn't an accusation, it was a statement of fact. She needed help, Naruto said simply. You have a bad habit of collecting strays, Nami said, a small, wry smile touching her lips. But her eyes were soft. She was looking at the way he stood, so solid and dependable, the man who had saved her, who had saved a kingdom, who had saved the woman beside him. Her admiration was mixing with something warmer, something that made her want to stand just a little bit closer. Robin said nothing. She just watched him, the desert wind whipping strands of her dark hair across her face. He was an anomaly, a paradox, a being of immense, world-breaking power whose defining characteristic was boundless, almost reckless, empathy. He hadn't just saved her life. He had challenged the very foundation of her existence. He was a beacon of light in the darkness she had called home for 20 years. And for the first time, she felt a flicker of something she had long since thought dead. Hope. The three of them stood there in silence, a navigator, an archaeologist, and a sage from another world, sailing away from a kingdom they had saved, each of them bound to the man in the orange jacket by invisible threads of gratitude, admiration, and a burgeoning, complicated love. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. Echoes in the sky. The sea turned vindictive after Alabasta. The Grand Line, as if offended by their recent victory, threw tantrums of saltwater and rage. Waterspouts danced on the horizon like angry gods, and the weather shifted from blistering sun to freezing rain in the span of a single meal. But the true storm was not in the sky. It was hunting them. Naruto felt it first, a prickling on his skin, a cold knot in his gut that had nothing to do with the sea. His sage mode, still unable to drink from this world's chaotic well of energy, had nonetheless adapted. It had become a hyper-acute danger sense, a passive sonar that pinged off malice and intent. Something's coming, he said, his voice cutting through the cheerful din of Luffy trying to fish and Usopp telling a tall tale to Chopper. The crew went silent. They had learned to trust that quiet tone. Nami scrambled up to the crow's nest. Her telescope pressed to her eye. Zoro's hand rested on his swords. Sanji dropped his spatula, his posture shifting from relaxed cook to coiled spring. See anything, Nami? Luffy asked, his usual grin replaced by a look of grim anticipation. No, nothing, she called down. The sea is empty for miles. She's right, Naruto murmured, his gaze fixed not on the horizon, but directly behind them. It's not on the sea. As if on cue, a shadow fell over the Going Merry. It was vast and sudden, plunging the deck into an unnatural twilight. They looked up. A ship, colossal and black, was descending from the clouds. It had no sails, no visible means of propulsion. It was carved from the same light-absorbing black stone as the blade Kestrel had wielded, and it moved with a silent, predatory grace. It wasn't a pirate ship or a marine vessel. It was an executioner's block given flight. Figures lined the railing, all clad in the stark white uniforms and featureless masks of the Celestial Wardens. They were an army of ghosts, their presence cold and sterile. At their head stood a man built like a bulldog, his muscular frame straining the confines of his uniform. His mask was identical to the others, but the sheer aura of brutal power radiating from him set him apart. Target identified, the man's voice boomed, amplified by some internal device. It was harsh and gravelly, like stones grinding together. Maelstrom anomaly. By order of the 5 elders, you are designated a threat to global stability. Surrender for immediate deconstruction. There was no room for negotiation in his tone. It was the voice of a man who only knew one solution to every problem: overwhelming force. Deconstruction. Usopp squeaked. That doesn't sound good. Who are these guys? Luffy demanded, his fists clenched. The real government, Naruto said grimly. The ones who pull the strings. Kestrel was their scout. He stepped forward, placing himself between the descending ship and his crew. "This is my fight. Get the Mary out of here." "Like hell," Zoro snarled, drawing Wado Ikimonji. "We don't run from a fight. And leave a Nakama behind. Not a chance," Luffy declared. The bulldog-like warden let out a short, sharp laugh. "Commendable loyalty. It will be your undoing." He leapt from his ship, 100-foot drop, and landed on the Mary's deck with the force of a cannonball. The little caravel groaned, timbers screaming in protest. The deck where he landed splintered, and the man rose to his full, intimidating height. "I am Warden Titus, and you will be my quarry." He lunged. His speed was shocking for a man of his size. He wasn't aiming for Naruto. He was aiming for Nami, who was still in the crow's nest, frozen in shock. It was a tactical, rule choice. Target the weakest to destabilize the strongest. Naruto's eyes flared with crimson light, the pupil elongating into a slit. Kurama's chakra, raw and furious, surged to the surface. He moved in a flash of gold, intercepting Titus midair. Their forearms met with a thunderous clap that cracked the mast. The force of the impact sent a shockwave across the water, flattening the waves for 50 yards. Titus was thrown back, landing solidly on the deck. Naruto landed silently between him and the mast, a low growl rumbling in his chest. "You don't touch them," he snarled, his voice a duet of his own and Kurama's. "So, the beast shows its claws," Titus grunted, shaking his arm. "Impressive. Let me show you mine." His body began to twist and contort. Muscle and bone warped, his uniform ripping apart as his form expanded. Brown, shaggy fur sprouted from his skin, his face elongating into a snout filled with dagger-like teeth. He grew, and grew, until a monstrous, bipedal bear-like creature stood where the man had been. Easily 10 feet tall, it was a zone transformation, but twisted, more brutal than Chopper's. This was a power honed for pure destruction. "Ancient Zone. Model Ursa Major," Titus roared, his voice now a guttural nightmare. He swiped with claws a foot long, each one capable of gutting a sea king. Naruto met the charge, his body cloaked in the bubbling, golden energy of his version 1 Kurama chakra mode. This was a fight he couldn't win with simple taijutsu. This was a battle of monsters. The deck of the Going Merry became their arena. Titus was a hurricane of brute force, his claws tearing through the deck, the railings, the cannons. Naruto was a phantom of golden energy, weaving, dodging, redirecting. He used chakra arms to deflect blows, to push off the mast, to swing around the rigging. He was faster, more agile, but Titus was a walking mountain of muscle and rage. Every blow that landed, even glancing ones, felt like being hit by a freight train. "Is this all the maelstrom is?" Titus taunted, smashing a section of the cabin to splinters. A fleeting gnat, Naruto's response was a Rasengan, slammed directly into the beast's chest. The spiraling chakra ground against Titus's thick hide, but it didn't drill through. The zone's durability was immense. It threw Titus back, but he rose, shaking his head, a furious look in his beady eyes. The our wardens on the ship above began to descend, rappelling down lines to join the fray. "Zoro, Sanji," Naruto yelled, parrying a claw strike that gouged deep furrows in the deck. "Get them off my ship." The swordsman and the cook needed no further encouragement. 3-sword style, onigiri, diable hambi, flambage shot. Their attacks crashed into the descending wardens, turning the air into a maelstrom of steel and fire. Naruto knew he couldn't keep this up. The Mary was breaking apart under the strain of their battle. He had to end this, and he had to end it now. He disengaged, leaping to the figurehead of the ship. He held out his hand, gathering a dense, violent sphere of Kurama's chakra. It was darker, more malevolent than his own. A miniature Biju bomb. Titus saw the threat, his animal instincts screaming at him. He charged, heedless of the damage to the ship, intending to crush Naruto before he could unleash the attack. Too late, Naruto whispered. He didn't fire it. Instead, he slammed the condensed ball of energy down onto the deck in front of him. The resulting explosion was controlled but catastrophic. It didn't spread outwards. It blew a hole straight through the bottom of the Going Merry. Water surged in, and the ship, already battered, began to sink. The crew cried out in alarm, but Naruto had a plan. As the ship went down, a colossal geyser of water erupted from the sea directly beneath them. A knock upstream. It was the desperate escape route Nami had been searching for, a one-in-a-million phenomenon. Naruto hadn't found it, he had made it. The force of his focused Biju bomb hitting the deep, pressurized ocean floor had triggered the eruption. The Going Merry, Titus, and the entire crew were launched into the sky on a pillar of roaring water. "Everyone hang on," Naruto yelled, using his chakra to stick himself and his friends to the wreckage of their ship as it rocketed toward the heavens. Titus, caught by surprise, tumbled helplessly in the raging torrent. The last Naruto saw of him was a furious, snarling beast being carried away into the endless blue. They landed on a sea of clouds. A solid, fluffy, white ocean that stretched to a new, higher horizon. The Going Merry was in ruins, a floating wreck held together by little more than Hope and Sanji's desperate patch jobs. They had survived, but they were shipwrecked in the sky. This new world was ethereal and silent. Strange, balloon-like plants drifted by. Giant, sky fish swam through the clouds. It was a place straight out of a fairy tale. And at its center, visible in the distance, was a landmass floating in the sky. A verdant island crowned by colossal, beanstalk-like vines. Skypia. The days that followed were a strange mixture of peaceful survival and quiet introspection. They were stranded, but they were together. The immediate threat was gone. For the first time in weeks, they could breathe. The bonds between Naruto, Nami, and Robin deepened in the quiet isolation of the White Sea. With no kingdom to save or assassins to fight, they found time for smaller moments. Nami, the consummate navigator, was fascinated by this new world. She and Naruto would spend hours at the broken railing, her trying to map the cloud currents and him trying to explain the concept of chakra and how it differed from the silent energy of this world. "So, it's like life force?" she asked one afternoon, sketching a diagram of his spiral seal in her logbook. "Sort of," he said. "It's spiritual and physical energy mixed together. In my world, everything has it. Trees, animals, people. We can use it to do what I do. Break a warlord's legendary sword with your bare hands, you mean?" she said with a smirk. But her eyes were soft. She wasn't just asking about his power. She was asking about him. She reached out, her fingers gently tracing the whisker marks on his cheek. "And these, are they part of it?" Naruto flinched slightly at the unexpected touch, but he didn't pull away. Her fingers were warm. "An old side effect," he said, his voice quiet. "From the monster I told Chopper about." Nami's hand dropped, but she didn't move away. She saw the flash of old pain in his eyes and her heart ached. She wanted to erase that pain, to replace it with the peace she felt when he was near. The feeling was no longer just gratitude or admiration. It was a fierce, possessive warmth that bloomed in her chest whenever he smiled at her. Robin, on the other hand, connected with him on an intellectual and historical level. She was recovering, physically and emotionally. The crew's easy acceptance of her, spearheaded by Luffy and reinforced by Naruto's quiet defense, was slowly chipping away at her cynical shell. She found herself talking to Naruto late at night, when the others were asleep. The stars of the lower world a faint glimmer far below. They spoke of history. She told him of the Void Century, a 100-year gap in history erased by the world government. She spoke of the poneglyphs, indestructible stones that held the true history, a crime punishable by death to even study. Naruto, in turn, told her stories of his world. Not the specifics of names and places, but the broad strokes. He spoke of the Sage of Six Paths, of the 10-tailed beast, of a great, ancient conflict that had shaped his world and left scars that lasted 1,000 years. "Your world also has a void century," she observed one night, her chin resting on her hand as she watched him. "A history that was deliberately buried. The victors write the history books," Naruto said with a shrug. "It's the same everywhere, I guess. But you don't just want to learn it," she pressed, her eyes searching his. "You want to change the future with it. That's why you saved me, isn't it?" You saw the poneglyph and you saw a kindred spirit." "I saw someone who was drowning," he corrected gently. "The poneglyph was just the water you were in." His answer floored her. He consistently refused to see her as a tool, a key, or a demon. He saw a person. This simple, Stubborn empathy was a force more powerful than any Buster Call. It was eroding the walls she had spent a lifetime building. Our fascination with him was becoming dangerously personal. She was a scholar, and he was the most fascinating text she had ever encountered, a living piece of history from another world. She wanted to decipher him, to understand the source of his impossible hope. The two women were not blind. Nami saw the long, quiet conversations Naruto had with Robin. She saw the intellectual spark that passed between them, a connection she, with her practical, monetary worldview, couldn't quite share. A sharp, unfamiliar jealousy pricked at her. She wasn't used to competing for anything other than money. Robin, for her part, saw the easy, domestic intimacy between Naruto and Nami. She saw the way he'd smile when she successfully charted a cloud current, the way he'd instinctively move to shield her when the wreckage of the Mary listed dangerously. She, who had never known a safe harbor, saw him offering one to the navigator. It sparked a strange, academic curiosity that felt dangerously like envy. He and spoken tension came to a head one evening. Naruto was asleep, a rare moment of peace for him. Nami and Robin found themselves sitting on opposite sides of the deck, pretending to be busy. "He's fond of you," Robin said finally, her voice neutral as she cleaned her glasses. Nami bristled. "He's my friend, my nakama." "Is that all?" Robin asked, her gaze sharp. "I am an archaeologist. I'm trained to see the things buried beneath the surface. And the way you look at him, it is not simple friendship." Nami stood up, her fists clenched. "And what about you? You follow him around like a shadow, asking him questions all night. What do you want from him?" "His power, information, perhaps," Robin said, her voice softening. "At first. But now, I'm not so sure." She looked at Naruto's sleeping form, his face peaceful for once. "He is the first person in 20 years who has not looked at me and seen a monster or a tool. He looked at me and saw a person worth saving. What I want from him is to understand how that is possible." Nami's anger deflated, replaced by a shared understanding. They were both drawn to the same impossible flame. They were both survivors, albeit of different kinds of hells. And they had both been saved by the same man. "He's a good person," Nami said quietly, sitting back down. "Too good for this world, maybe." "Perhaps," Robin agreed, "which is why he will need people to protect him from it." It wasn't a truce, not exactly. But it was a recognition of a shared reality. They both cared for him, deeply. And they both knew he was too important to be torn apart by their own insecurities. His happiness, they tacitly agreed, was the priority. Their peaceful exile ended when they were found by a knight on a flying bird and brought to the shores of Skypia. They were immediately branded as illegal entrants and found themselves on the wrong side of the law in a land ruled by a man who called himself God. Naruto felt his power the moment they set foot on the upper yard. It was a crackling, arrogant energy that blanketed the entire island. He called it mantra. Naruto recognized it for what it was. A crude, undeveloped form of observation haki, amplified by a devil fruit. The conflict in Skypia was not one of strength, but of ideology. Enel, with his lightning powers from the rumble fruit and his ability to hear every voice on the island, had declared himself an omniscient god. He passed judgment from on high, smiting anyone who spoke against him with pillars of lightning from the sky. To the Straw Hats, he was a powerful enemy. To Naruto, who had fought and befriended beings who could create and destroy worlds, Enel was a child throwing a tantrum. A bully with a powerful toy. The survival game Enel forced upon them was brutal. His 4 priests, with their strange dials and bizarre trials, were formidable opponents for the rest of the crew. Naruto, however, treated it as a training exercise. When confronted by the priest Satori and his surprise balls, Naruto's sage mode simply told him where every trap was. He walked through the trial without triggering a single one, incapacitating the priest with a single, precise chop to the neck. He didn't have time for games. His goal was singular. Find Enel and turn him off. He found him aboard his flying ark, the Maxim, a massive vessel of solid gold. Enel was lounging on a throne, aboard. Arrogant expression on his face, his long earlobes dangling. "So, the blue sea creature who defies my priests has come to be judged," Enel said, a lazy smirk on his face. "You are interesting. You're voice is loud. Much louder than the others. It burns like a sun. Tell me, what god do you pray to? I don't pray to anyone, Naruto said, his feet planted solidly on the golden deck. And I don't bow to bullies. Enel's smirk vanished. Insolent mortal. He raised a finger. A low hum filled the air. Divine judgment. A massive pillar of lightning, thick as a house, erupted from the sky and slammed down on Naruto's position. The impact was blinding, the sound deafening. The golden arc groaned, and the clouds around them were vaporized. When the light faded, Enel was grinning. No mortal could survive such a strike. But his grin faltered. Naruto was still standing there, completely unharmed, wisps of smoke rising from his orange jacket. A faint, almost invisible aura of wind chakra had enveloped him, dispersing the electricity harmlessly. My turn, Naruto said. Enel stared, his jaw slack. Impossible. How are you standing? You should be ash. Lightning. Huh, Naruto said, a dangerous glint in his eye. My best friend has a thing for lightning, too. His is better. He began to walk forward. Here's a lesson for you. Some things are stronger than others. He raised his hand, and a familiar, high-pitched whirring filled the air. But this time, it was different. 4 small, sharp blades of wind chakra began to spin around the central sphere. Wind style. Rasenshuriken. He threw it. The screech of the miniature shuriken cutting through the air was a sound that broke reality. It wasn't as big as the ones he used in the war, but it was just as deadly. Enel, for the first time, felt a prickle of genuine fear. His mantra screamed at him. Danger. Death. He transformed into pure lightning, intending to dodge. But the Rasenshuriken was too fast. And it wasn't just a physical attack. It was comprised of billions of microscopic wind blades that attacked on a cellular level. It struck him. Enel didn't even have time to scream. His lightning form was shredded, torn apart by the wind blades that severed the very energy that held him together. The attack didn't just hit him, it dismantled his Logia form. He was forcibly reverted to his physical body, WH. Ick was then savaged by the remainder of the attack. He was sent tumbling across the deck, his body a mess of deep, bleeding cuts. He crashed into his own throne, broken and sputtering. How? He coughed, blood trickling from his lips. My lightning. I am thunder itself. I am invincible. No, Naruto said, now standing over him, his expression cold. You're just a man with a devil fruit. You're not a god. You're just a thug who found a powerful weapon and decided it made him special. He leaned in closer. A real god doesn't need to tell people he's a god. And they certainly don't rule through fear. He had defeated him not just with power, but by shattering the ideology that was the source of his power. He had stripped him of his divinity, leaving only the pathetic man underneath. It was then that Luffy came flying up, having been launched by a giant beanstalk. He landed on the ark, looked at the defeated Enel, then at Naruto, and pouted. Ah, Naruto, you beat him already. He was supposed to be my fight. Naruto just shrugged, a small smile on his face. Sorry, he was annoying. With Enel defeated and the golden bell of Shandora rung, peace returned to Skypia. The long war between the Skypians and the Shandians was over. As they prepared to leave, descending back to the blue sea on a giant, kite-like octopus, the crew was buzzing with their victory. Their bounties would surely skyrocket now. Naruto stood at the edge of their vessel, watching the Sky Island disappear back into the clouds. He was joined by Nami and Robin. The tension from before was gone, replaced by a comfortable, shared silence. You know, Nami said, breaking the quiet, you have a real knack for dethroning false gods. It's becoming a hobby, Naruto admitted with a wry grin. Robin looked at him, her smile small but genuine. Enel believed his power made him divine. You showed him that power without purpose is just noise. She paused. You have more power than anyone I have ever met. Yet you seek no throne. You claim no title. What is your purpose, Naruto-kun? It was the first time she had used the honorific. It was a sign of a new level of familiarity, of respect. Naruto looked at his friends. At Luffy, who was trying to eat the octopus kite. At Zoro and Sanji, who were already starting a stupid argument. At Usopp and Chopper, listening with rapt attention. He looked at Nami, her orange hair like a beacon in the sunlight. And he looked at Robin, her dark, intelligent eyes finally free of the shadows that had haunted them. His purpose. It was so simple. Them, he said, his voice soft but absolute. My purpose is them. Quote. Nami's heart swelled, and she had to look away to hide the blush on her cheeks. Robin's smile widened, a true, warm expression that lit up her face. In his simple answer, she had found the key to the enigma. His strength didn't come from Kurama, or from his chakra. It came from his bonds. As they descended toward the blue sea, a new bounty poster, carried by a news crew, fluttered past them. Caught in the wind, it landed on the deck. Usopp picked it up. Hey, guys, check it out. Luffy's bounty went up to 100 million. He yelled. And Zoro got one too. 60 million. Then he went silent, his eyes wide as he looked at another poster. He held it up. It was a stark, black and white photo of Naruto, taken during the fight on the Mary. He was cloaked in the golden chakra, his eyes crimson. A terrifyingly beautiful image of contained rage. Below it, the name was simple. The Maelstrom Anomaly. Naruto. And the bounty. 500 million berries. Dead or alive. The crew stared in stunned silence. It was one of the highest active bounties in the world. But it was the designation that was chilling. Not a pirate. Not a revolutionary. An anomaly. A thing to be erased. Naruto looked at the poster. His expression unreadable. He wasn't just a lost traveler anymore. He was an enemy of the world. He crumpled the poster in his hand, a flicker of orange flame consuming it to ash. He looked at the faces of his friends, at Nami and Robin who stood by his side, their expressions not of fear, but of grim determination. Well, he said, a slow, dangerous grin spreading across his face. Looks like things are about to get interesting. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. Against the world's tide. The return to the Blue Sea was less a triumphant homecoming and more a controlled crash. They landed in the middle of a marine naval base, an unfortunate consequence of their uncontrolled descent. The ensuing escape was a chaotic masterpiece of rubber fists, flying swords, and a few well-placed Rasengans to clear a path through the barricades. They were a whirlwind of notoriety, their new bounties painting a giant target on their backs. Every pirate, bounty hunter, and ambitious marine captain from Paradise to the New World now knew their faces. Their next stop was the legendary city of Water 7, a stunning metropolis built on the foundations of a sinking island. Its canals and waterways plied by amphibious bull-like creatures called Yagara. They had come for two reasons: to find a shipwright to fix the mortally wounded Going Merry, and to exchange the gold they acquired in Skypia for a mountain of berries. The city was a marvel of engineering and life, but Naruto felt a discordant hum beneath the surface. His senses, now sharply attuned to the emotional wavelengths of this world, picked up a current of anxiety and fear running through the city's cheerful facade. It was the scent of a conspiracy, a smell he knew all too well. The conspiracy found them first. While Luffy and the others were dealing with the shocking news that the Mary was beyond repair, Robin and Chopper went shopping. Naruto, sensing something amiss, shadowed them from the rooftops. He watched as a man in a mask and top hat, his movements unnaturally fluid, began to follow Robin. His posture was that of an assassin, his focus absolute. Naruto recognized the style, the soulless efficiency. It was the same as the warden's, but less refined, more theatrical. He was about to intervene when a second figure, a tall man with the square jaw of a government agent, stepped out of the crowd and spoke to Robin. She stiffened, her face becoming an emotionless mask that Naruto hadn't seen since before Alabasta. A silent, tense conversation took place, too far for him to hear, but he could read the body language. It wasn't a negotiation, it was an ultimatum. Robin gave a single, curt nod, and the men melted back into the crowd. She returned to the crew with a new, chilling distance in her eyes. That night, the city's celebrated hero, the mayor and president of the Galila Company, Iceberg, was attacked in his office. The assailants were masked, and the primary suspect, according to the eyewitnesses, was a tall, dark-haired woman. The city turned on them in an instant. The Straw Hats, the notorious pirates, were now also prime suspects in the attempted assassination of the city's beloved leader. The Galila shipwrights, men they had moments ago been friendly with, now looked at them with hatred and suspicion. Naruto knew it was a frame job. He had felt Robin's location throughout the night. She hadn't been anywhere near Iceberg's mansion. The men who had approached her, the attack on Iceberg, it was all connected. A trap was being sprung, and Robin was at its center. He found her standing alone on a balcony overlooking the city's moonlit canals. "They're trying to separate you from us," he said, his voice quiet as he landed beside her. "Who are they?" Robin didn't look at him. Her voice was cold, brittle. "It doesn't concern you. I have decided to leave your crew. My business is my own." "Like hell it is," Naruto snapped, his patience wearing thin. He grabbed her arm, forcing her to face him. "You are one of us, Robin. Your enemies are our enemies. Talk to me." He saw it then, in the depths of her eyes. It wasn't malice. It wasn't betrayal. It was a bone-deep, soul-crushing terror. It was the look of a person who believed they were a walking catastrophe, a plague that brought ruin to everyone they cared for. She was trying to protect them by cutting herself away. "You don't understand," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You can't fight them. No one can. They are the world government's shadow. The darkness that devours the light. If you stand with me, they will destroy you all." "Let them try," Naruto said, his grip on her arm unrelenting. His eyes burned with a fierce, protective fire. "I told you, didn't I? I don't care who you were. I don't care who's hunting you. You're our archaeologist. You're my friend. That's the only thing that matters." Before she could answer, the night exploded. The masked assassins from before, a whole group of them, burst onto the scene. They moved with superhuman speed and strength, their techniques a bizarre and deadly martial art. They were Cipher Pol Number 9, the world government's most clandestine and powerful intelligence agency. Their leader, a man with a pigeon on his shoulder named Rob Lucci, looked at Naruto with cold, dead eyes. "The Maelstrom Anomaly. Our true target." He spoke, but his mouth didn't move. The pigeon on his shoulder did the talking. "Executor Silas sends his regards. He has designed this scenario specifically for you. The board is set. The choice is yours. Sacrifice your crew for this woman. Or sacrifice her for your freedom. He is curious to see which part of your psyche is stronger, your loyalty to your family, or your instinct for self-preservation." This wasn't just an arrest. It was a psychological experiment. A test crafted by the cold, analytical mind of the man with the silence fruit. Silas wasn't just trying to capture Robin, he was trying to break Naruto. The fight was short and brutal. Lucci and his agents were masters of Rokushiki, the 6 powers. They could move like the wind, turn their bodies to iron, and fire compressed air bullets from their fingers. They were on another level entirely from any foe the Straw Hats had faced before. Naruto found himself on the defensive, forced to protect a now unresponsive Robin while fending off multiple, coordinated attacks. A clone he had sent to check on Luffy relayed a horrifying image to his mind. Luffy, defeated, wedged helplessly between 2 buildings. Lucci had taken him out before the main event even began. CP9's goal became clear. They weren't trying to defeat Naruto. They were trying to corner him, to isolate him, to force Robin into making a choice. And she did. In the chaos of the fight, as Naruto was engaged with Lucci, she made a deal. Her life, her cooperation, in exchange for the Straw Hats' safety. Lucci, on behalf of the world government, accepted. Naruto saw it happen. He saw the flicker of pained resignation on Robin's face as she walked away with them, a willing prisoner. He saw the smug, triumphant look in Lucci's eyes. They had won. They had proven that in the face of overwhelming power, bonds would break. The last thing Robin did was turn to him, her face an unreadable mask once more. "I will not be saved," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "Do not follow me." It was a lie. Her heart, which Naruto could feel beating frantically with his sage senses, screamed a different story. It screamed in terror, in sacrifice, in a desperate, silent plea. Something inside Naruto, a dam that had held back the full, terrifying force of his wartime experiences, his losses, his deepest traumas, finally broke. He saw Jiraiya, walking away to his death in the rain. He saw his parents, sacrificing themselves for him. He saw Sasuke, consumed by darkness, choosing a path of self-destruction. And now Robin, another person he cared for, willingly walking into the jaws of the beast to protect him. The air around him went cold. His blue eyes bled into crimson, the golden chakra that cloaked him turning a deeper, more violent shade of orange, churning like a miniature sun. A low, guttural roar escaped his lips, a sound that was more beast than man. Kurama's rage and his own mingled into a singular, incandescent fury. "You think this is a game?" he snarled, his voice a low thunder that vibrated through the city. "You think you can take my family and I'll just let you?" He looked past Lucci, past the city, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon, toward the judicial island of Eni's lobby. The world government's fortress of absolute justice. He wasn't speaking to CP9 anymore. He was speaking to the world. "I am Uzumaki Naruto," he bellowed, his verses OICE amplified by chakra until it echoed across the entire island of Water 7, a declaration of war. "You have taken my friend. And I am coming to get her back. I don't care how many ships you have. I don't care how high your walls are. I will tear your island from the sea. I will burn your fortress to the ground. I am coming for Nico Robin. And I will leave nothing but ruins in my wake." It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. A prophecy. The journey to Eni's lobby was a frantic, desperate race against time. The Aqua Laguna, a storm of biblical proportions, was descending on Water 7. They had no ship. Their captain was missing. Their crew was fractured. But Naruto's declaration had lit a fire under them. Nami, her face set with grim determination, found a way. The Galila shipwrights and the Frankie family, having learned the truth about CP9 and the frame job from a wounded iceberg, threw their lot in with the Straw Hats. Frankie, the cyborg shipwright who had initially been their antagonist, revealed a secret project. A prototype sea train, the Rocket Man. It was their only way to cross the storm. They found Luffy, rescued him, and told him what had happened. The captain's response was simple and immediate. "Then we're going to war." The ride on the Rocket Man was a near-suicidal charge through the tempest. The sea train was an uncontrollable beast, and it was all Nami and the others could do to keep it on the tracks. Naruto stood at the front of the train, his arms crossed, his face a mask of cold fury. He was a storm staring into a storm. Nami came to stand beside him, wind whipping her hair across her face. She didn't say anything, she just put her hand on his arm. It was a small, simple gesture, but it was everything. It said, "I'm with you. We're with you. You are not alone in this." He looked at her, and for a moment, the inferno in his eyes softened. He gave her a single, sharp nod. The connection was reaffirmed. They arrived at Eni's lobby like a thunderbolt. The island was a fortress, a symbol of the world government's unbreachable power. It was connected to the Tower of Justice, where Robin was being held, by a long, seemingly impassable chasm. The Straw Hats and their allies stood before the gates, a tiny, ragtag army against a force of 10,000 soldiers. Luffy stepped forward. "Robin, we're here to get you back," he yelled. Robin appeared on a distant balcony, flanked by Lucci and the other agents of CP9. Her face was pale, her eyes filled with despair. "Go away," she cried, her voice breaking. "I told you not to come. I don't want to see you. I don't want to live. Just let me die." Her words were a dagger in the heart of the crew. But Naruto heard the truth beneath the lie. He saw the terror that was forcing her to say those things. He stepped forward, his golden chakra flaring to life, a beacon of defiance against the grim fortress. He pointed a finger directly at the world government flag fluttering atop the Tower of Justice. "Sogeking," Luffy said, turning to Usopp in his masked disguise, "shoot down that flag." Usopp, with a new, powerful slingshot, did as he was told. A flaming bird projectile soared across the chasm and struck the flag, setting it ablaze. It was an act of pure, undiluted treason. A declaration of war against the entire world. Then Robin, her will finally breaking, her heart finally giving into the impossible hope they offered, screamed the words that would define the battle. "I want to live. Take me out to sea with you." That was all Naruto needed to hear. "Luffy," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "The small fry are mine. The tower is yours." He didn't wait for a reply. He made a single hand seal. Mass Shadow Clone Jutsu. The front courtyard of Eni's lobby was instantly flooded with 1,000 orange-clad figures. The marine soldiers stared in stunned disbelief. "Attack," Naruto commanded, and his army surged forward. What followed was not a battle. It was a slaughter. But it was a non-lethal one. The clones, each one imbued with a fraction of Naruto's skill and Kurama's power, moved through the 10,000 soldiers like a wave. They were a blur of motion, of precise strikes in overwhelming numbers. They disarmed, disabled, and neutralized the entire garrison in minutes, leaving a field of groaning, unconscious bodies. While the clones held the island, the Straw Hats launched themselves across the chasm. Carried by Frankie's ingenuity, they began their individual battles against the members of CP9 inside the Tower of Justice. Naruto, however, didn't follow them. He stood in the now empty courtyard, his eyes fixed on the tower. His job was to handle the fallout. And he knew it was coming. The Buster Call, a fleet of 10 marine battleships, with the authority to annihilate an entire island, had been summoned. It was the world government's ultimate, indiscriminate weapon. The same weapon that had destroyed Robin's home, Ohara. The battleships arrived, forming a ring around Eni's lobby. They began their bombardment, their cannons raining down destruction. Naruto watched the cannonballs arc through the air. He entered his full Kurama chakra mode. His body was enveloped in a roaring, translucent avatar of golden chakra, a miniature version of the Nine Tails itself. Chakra arms, massive and powerful, sprouted from his back. He didn't dodge the cannonballs. He caught them. Dozens of them. The golden arms snatched the explosive shells out of the sky, holding them in their grasp. The vice admirals on the decks of the battleship stared, their mouths agape. "What is that? That monster?" One of them stammered. Naruto didn't just hold the cannonballs. He threw them back. With pinpoint accuracy, he hurled the projectiles at the cannons that had fired them, creating a chain of devastating explosions across the decks of the fleet. He systematically disarmed the entire Buster Call fleet in less than a minute. He wasn't done. He leapt, his chakra enhanced, strength carrying him 1,000 feet into the air, until he was above the flagship. He came down like a golden meteor, his fist cocked back. He slammed into the deck of the ship, the impact shattering the mast and splitting the hull. He didn't sink it, he disabled it. He moved from ship to ship, a golden god of destruction. He wasn't just fighting a battle, he was making a statement. He was showing the world government the price of touching his family. It was then that his true opponent arrived. Executor Silas. He didn't arrive on a ship. He simply appeared. On the deck of the crippled flagship, he coalesced out of the shadows. A calm, silent figure in the midst of the chaos. He was wearing his pristine white uniform, his face hidden by a new, more ornate mask. "Impressive," Silas said, his voice a flat, chilling monotone that cut through the sounds of destruction. "You have exceeded all my projections. You are not a weapon. You are a force of nature." Naruto faced him, his Kurama avatar churning around him. "You," he growled. "You did this. You set this all up." "I did," Silas admitted without shame. "Order must be maintained. The chaos of individual will, the sentimentality you call bonds, is a disease. The demon of Ohara is a vector for that disease. She must be purged. And you are the plague itself." He raised a hand. The world went silent. It was not the absence of sound. It was an active, oppressive nothing. The roar of Naruto's chakra avatar, the crashing of the waves, the distant explosions, all of it vanished. A sphere of absolute silence expanded from Silas, enveloping the entire ship. Naruto felt the churning chakra of his avatar sputter, the golden form flickering violently. "This is the power of the mute fruit," Silas explained, his voice the only thing audible within his bubble of null space. "I am a silence human. I create, control, and become silence. And silence is the end of all things. All energy, all vibration, all sound." Naruto's Rasengan, formed in his hand, dissipated into nothing. The spiraling chakra, a vortex of sound and energy, could not exist in Silas's S-domain. "Your power is loud, Maelstrom," Silas said, drawing a blow. That seemed to be made of solidified shadow. "And in my world, there is no place for noise." The Kurama avatar dissolved completely, Naruto's most powerful weapon rendered inert. He was back to his base form. The only thing remaining being the faint crimson glow in his eyes and the enhanced physical abilities from Kurama's passive influence. Silas charged, his movements unnaturally fast in the dead silence. Naruto was forced into a desperate hand-to-hand battle. He was a master of taijutsu, but Silas was his equal, his movements precise and deadly. Worse, Naruto's senses were crippled. His sage mode relied on sensing the flow of energy, of life, and Silas's aura was a black hole that swallowed everything. His precognitive abilities were gone. He was fighting blind. Silas's blade nicked his arm, and the wound didn't heal. The silence was not just dampening his active techniques, it was suppressing Kurama's passive regenerative abilities. For the first time, Naruto was truly on the back foot. He was outmatched, his powers neutralized, he was fighting an enemy perfectly designed to counter him. "Kid, you have to get out of his range," Kurama roared in his mind, the one sound the silence couldn't touch. "I can't," Naruto thought back, gritting his teeth as he parried a strike that would have taken his head off. "He's too fast," Lucci's voice echoed in his memory. The board is set. This was it, the checkmate Silas had designed for him. But Silas had made one critical miscalculation. He had studied Naruto's power, his abilities, his energy signatures. But he hadn't studied Naruto. He had seen the jutsus. But he had missed the shinobi. He had seen the maelstrom, but he had missed the unpredictable knucklehead ninja. Naruto dodged another slash, the blade taking a piece of his jacket. He couldn't win with power. He couldn't win with jutsu. So he had to win with his wits. He did something Silas never could have predicted. He stopped fighting. He dropped his guard and grinned, a wide, confident, foxy grin. Silas paused, his instincts screaming at him that this was a trap. "What are you doing?" Naruto didn't answer. He just held up a single-hand seal. The tiger seal. It wasn't for a jutsu. It was a signal. And then, Silas felt it. A presence directly behind him. He spun around, and his cold, analytical mind stuttered. Standing there, on the other side of the deck, was another Naruto. Identical in every way, and he was standing outside the sphere of silence. It was a clone, a single shadow clone that Naruto had created and hidden on another ship during the initial chaos, long before Silas had appeared. A contingency, an ace in the hole he had created before he even knew what game he was playing. The clone grinned, a massive, churning ball of violent, purple-black chakra in its hands. A tailed beast bomb, not a miniature one, a full-sized one, the kind that could wipe an island off the map. "Checkmate," the real Naruto said, his voice finally audible again as Silas, shocked, let his concentration waver for a split second, shrinking the sphere of silence around himself. Silas was trapped. If he stayed, the bomb would annihilate him. If he moved, the real Naruto, now free of the silence, would destroy him. He had been so focused on the king, he had forgotten to watch for the pawns. "You," Silas snarled, the first crack in his emotionless facade. With a roar, the clone threw the tailed beast bomb. Silas had no choice. He abandoned his fight, his body dissolving into pure shadow and silence, and fled, the bomb detonating behind him in a cataclysmic explosion. Scion of light and power that vaporized the flagship and half the ships around it. Naruto stood on a piece of floating wreckage, watching him go. He had won, but barely. His body was a mess of cuts and bruises. His chakra reserves dangerously low. He looked up at the Tower of Justice, just in time to see Luffy, in a last, desperate burst of strength, deliver a final gum-gum jet gatling that shattered Ed Lucci's iron body and sent him flying. They had done it. They had won. In the aftermath, on the deck of the rescued Going Merry, which had come to sail one last time to save them, the crew was reunited. Robin was there, safe. Her eyes full of tears that were not of sorrow, but of overwhelming, unbelievable joy. The emotional walls that had stood between Naruto, Nami, and Robin were gone, burned away by the heat of the battle. They found him at the stern, staring at the burning island, his golden chakra faded, leaving him looking tired and vulnerable. Nami came to his side, her hand finding his. "You were reckless," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You were magnificent," Robin said, standing on his other side, her own hand gently resting on his shoulder. He looked at them, at these two brilliant, strong, beautiful women who had stood by him, who had trusted him. He was exhausted, battered, and an enemy of the entire world. And he had never been happier. He didn't say anything. He just leaned his head back. letting their touch anchor him. They stood there, a silent trinity, as the Going Merry sailed away from the ashes of Eni's lobby. They were not just a crew anymore. They were not just friends. They were a family, forged in fire and rebellion, bound by a love that defied the world. And at the center of it all was the maelstrom, the anomaly, the boy from another world who had taught them all how to fight for what they loved. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. A Bargain of Shadows. The sea post Eni's lobby was unnervingly calm, a placid blue mirror reflecting a sky scrubbed clean of storms. It was a deceptive peace, the deep breath before the next plunge. Their new ship, a marvel of atom wood and ingenious design gifted to them by Frankie and the Galila shipwrights, cut through the waves with a silent, leonine grace. They had named it the Thousand Sunny, a testament to the impossible light they carried into the world's darkest corners. A new, comfortable domesticity had settled over the ship. With Robin saved and their bonds forged in the fires of a declared war against the world, the awkwardness between Naruto, Nami, and Robin had evaporated, replaced by an easy, multifaceted intimacy. Nami, no longer just a navigator, had taken on the role of the crew's fiercely protective quartermaster and, unofficially, Naruto's primary caretaker. She would be the one to stitch up the tears in his orange jacket, to make sure he ate after a long night of watch, to drag him into a card game when he grew too lost in his own thoughts. Their interactions were a dance of playful bickering and profound, unspoken affection. She would swat him on the head for doing something reckless, then, moments later, her hand would linger on his arm, her eyes soft with a worry that was deeper than friendship. Robin, now fully integrated into the crew's chaotic dynamic, was his intellectual confidant. She was the one who could grasp the sheer, world-breaking scale of his past. They would spend hours in the ship's library, her poring over ancient texts, him sketching out the complex theory of hand seals and chakra natures. She taught him the script of the poneglyphs, and he, in turn, explained the concept of tailed beasts and Jinchuriki. She found his stories not just fascinating, but validating. His world, with its own ancient secrets and powerful, lonely beings, made her feel less like an anomaly and more like a part of a larger, cosmic pattern. Her affection was quieter than Nami's, expressed in a shared cup of coffee, a rare, genuine smile directed only at him. And the way she would subtly position herself to have his back in any confrontation, her arms crossed, ready to sprout 1,000 more. Vivi, though miles away in Alabasta, was a constant presence. They had acquired a long-distance Den Mushi, a rare and expensive model, which sat on the desk in Nami's cartography room. Every few days, her voice would crackle across the line, a comforting link to the kingdom they had saved. She would give them political updates, news of the world government's frantic attempts to cover up the Eni's lobby disaster, but mostly, she just wanted to hear their voices. Her calls often drifted into late-night conversations with Naruto. She saw him not just as a powerhouse, but as a leader. She asked his advice on matters of state, on how to inspire hope in a nation still healing. To her, he was the ideal, the embodiment of strength tempered by compassion. The distance did not diminish her feelings, it refined them, distilling her admiration into a pure, painful longing. The three women were aware of each other's place in his life. There was no longer jealousy, but a complex, unspoken synergy. Nami grounded him in the present. Robin connected him to the past. Vivi represented the future he was building. They were the pillars of his new world, and they knew it. This fragile piece was torn asunder when they drifted into the Florian Triangle, a stretch of ocean shrouded in a permanent, ghostly fog. The sea was dead, the wind was gone, and a spectral, abandoned ship drifted toward them. A talking skeleton named Brook, a devil fruit user who had owned back to life only to find his body had rotted away, joined their crew in a whirlwind of bad jokes and soulful music. But he came with a warning. A shadow thief roamed these waters. Before they could heed it, they were trapped. A massive island, which was in fact a ship the size of a city, emerged from the fog and captured the Thousand Sunny in a giant web. Thriller Bark. The domain of another of the 7 warlords, Gecko Moria. The island was a gothic nightmare, a parody of horror tropes with zombies, talking paintings, and a mad scientist named Drive. Hogback. Moria's power was insidious. He could steal the shadows of others and implant them into corpses, creating a loyal, undying army of zombies. One by one, the shadows of Zoro, Sanji, and Luffy were stolen. Their bodies fell into a comatose state. Their vibrant life forces dimmed. Naruto, cloaked and scouting ahead, felt it happen. A sudden, jarring void where his friend's energy signatures should have been. He returned to the Sunny to find Nami, Usopp, and Chopper in a panic. The mood was not of battle, but of creeping, supernatural dread. This wasn't an enemy you could punch. How do you fight a man who can steal your very soul? He takes your shadow, Nami explained, her voice trembling slightly. And if the sun touches you without it, you turn to dust. Zoro, Sanji, and Luffy, they're all in a coma. Naruto's eyes narrowed. He looked at his own shadow, long and distorted in the eerie light of Thriller bark. So, he manipulates a part of a person's spiritual essence and binds it to a physical form, he analyzed, his mind racing. It's a crude form of the reanimation jutsu, but instead of a soul, he's using a shadow as the catalyst. Can you fight it? Robin asked, her face grim. She had joined them, her own shadow still intact. I don't know, Naruto admitted, and for the first time, the crew saw a flicker of genuine uncertainty in him. His power was based on the interplay of spiritual and physical energy. Iya's was a direct violation of that natural order. But I'm about to find out. He became a ghost. He used his sage mode to track the stolen shadows, not by sight, but by the faint, lingering scent of his friend's life force. He moved through the haunted mansion, bypassing the clumsy zombies and traps with contemptuous ease. He was a shinobi in a house of horrors, and the monsters were hopelessly out of their league. He found Moria in his grand hall, a grotesquely large, onion-shaped man lounging on a throne. The shadows of his friends swirled in glass jars around him. Moria was laughing, reveling in his latest acquisitions. The shadow of a 100 million berry man. And two of his strongest crew. Kishishishi, he chortled. Give them back, Naruto said, appearing from the rafters and landing silently in the center of the hall. Moria's eyes widened. And who are you? Ah, I see. The Maelstrom anomaly. Your shadow. It feels enormous. So much power. It will be the crown jewel of my collection. He stretched out a hand. And a pair of black, spectral scissors appeared in it. He snipped them in Naruto's direction. Doppelman, Moria's own shadow, a sentient, malleable creature, detached from the floor and flew at Naruto. Scissors in hand, intending to cut his shadow from his feet. Naruto didn't move. He simply held up a hand. A sphere of golden chakra, dense and radiant, pulsed in his palm. It wasn't a Rasengan. It was pure, unrefined sage of six paths energy. It was the energy of creation, of life itself. The Doppelman, a creature of stolen essence and necrotic energy, shrieked and recoiled as if burned. Unable to approach the raw, positive power. What is that light? Moria hissed, shielding his eyes. The opposite of you, Naruto said. He channeled the golden energy through his body. It flared, and his shadow, which had been a normal silhouette, began to glow with a golden outline. It solidified, twisting and rising from the floor not as a flat shape, but as a three-dimensional being of pure, golden light. A mirror image of Naruto himself. You steal shadows, Naruto stated, his voice ringing with power. I am my own light. Your power has no effect on me. Moria stared in horror. His entire fighting style was useless. But Moria was a warlord for a reason. He was a schemer. If I cannot take your shadow, he sneered, I will take your life. He opened his mouth and swallowed all the shadows he had collected on the island, 1,000 souls pouring into his body. His form swelled to a monstrous size, his power increasing exponentially. Shadows Asgard. He was now a giant. A lumbering behemoth of stolen power, and he smashed his fist down, bringing the entire mansion down around them. The fight moved to the frozen courtyard outside. Moria was a giant, but he was slow, clumsy. Naruto, a blur of orange and gold, ran circles around him. He didn't need a tailed beast bomb for this. He leapt into the air, creating a Rasenshuriken. He infused it with his golden six paths energy, turning the screeching blades from white to a brilliant, sun-like gold. Sage art. Six paths Rasenshuriken. He threw it. The attack didn't just cut. It purified. It struck the giant Moria, and instead of shredding him, it passed through him, and 1,000 shrieking shadows were exorcised from his body, flying back to their original owners across the island. Moria, his power source ripped away, reverted to his normal size and collapsed, unconscious. The sun was beginning to rise. The crew, their shadows returned, were safe. They had won. But the nightmare was not over. As the dazed crew gathered on the deck of the Sunny, a new figure appeared. He was huge, even larger than Titus had been, and carried a book that looked like a Bible. He wore strange, paw-padded gloves. Bartholomew Kuma, another warlord of the sea. But he was different. Naruto's senses screamed at him. This man was not like the others. There was a cold, hollow emptiness about him, a deep, mechanical sadness. And his power, it was terrifying. I am here on the order of the world government, Kuma said, his voice a deep, emotionless monotone. My mission is to eliminate all witnesses to Gecko Moria's defeat. However, he paused, his gaze landing on Naruto. I have been given a secondary, discretionary objective from Executor Silas. Kuma's gaze was heavy, analytical. Silas has concluded that you are not a conqueror. You are a protector. Your strength is directly proportional to the danger your companions are in. A direct assault is inefficient. He raised a paw-padded hand. So, he has authorized me to offer you a bargain. A shiver of dread went down Naruto's spine. This was it again. Another test. Another of Silas's cruel, psychological games. Surrender yourself, Naruto Uzumaki, Kuma stated. And the world government will issue a full, unconditional pardon to the entire Straw Hat crew. Their bounties will be erased. They will be free to sail the seas as they wish. The crew stared in stunned silence. It was an unbelievable offer. A get-out-of-jail-free card for life. But wait, Zoro snarled, stepping forward, his hands on his swords. What about Vivi? Kuma's head turned slowly. Ah, the Princess of Alabasta. That is the second part of the offer. Should Naruto Uzumaki surrender, the Nefertari family will be granted a permanent, untouchable seat on the World Council, heir status elevated to that of the founding 20 kingdoms. Alabasta will be guaranteed prosperity and protection for generations. A small price for a kingdom's eternal security, wouldn't you say? It was a perfect trap. It didn't threaten Naruto's friends. It offered them the world. Freedom for the crew. Security for Vivi's kingdom. All he had to do was give himself up. It was a deal designed to appeal to his deepest, most self-sacrificial instincts. A den-den mushi on Kuma's person began to ring. He answered it. Vivi's frantic voice came through the speaker. What is this? The world government just contacted me. They're talking about a deal. About Naruto. What's going on? She was on the other end, forced to be a part of this monstrous decision. Nami and Robin looked at Naruto, their faces pale with horror. They knew him. They knew his history of self-sacrifice. They knew he was considering it. Don't you dare, Naruto. Nami screamed, tears in her eyes. Don't you dare do it. He is right, Robin said, her voice trembling as she stepped in front of him. If anyone is to be surrendered, it should be me. I am the one they have always wanted. Luffy, still weak from his battle, tried to stand. I'm the captain. The responsibility is mine. Naruto held up a hand, silencing them all. He looked at Kuma, his face unreadable. Then, he looked at his friends, at their terrified, pleading faces. He heard Vivi's desperate sobs over the den-den mushi. And he smiled. A small, tired, but utterly resolute smile. No deal, he said, his voice ringing with absolute finality. Kuma tilted his head. You would deny your friend's freedom. You would deny the princess her kingdom's security. That is not what my data suggests. My friend's freedom isn't a bargaining chip, Naruto said, his eyes hard as diamonds. And they would never want a freedom bought with my life. As for Vivi, she's strong. She'll build a secure future for her kingdom with her own two hands. She doesn't need a deal with devils to do it. He looked toward the den-den mushi. Right, Vivi. There was a choked sob, and then her voice, filled with a strength he knew she possessed. Right, I refuse. We all refuse. Naruto turned back to Kuma. So, you can take your bargain, and you can shove it. Kuma was silent for a long, heavy moment. Executor Silas predicted this outcome as a 47% probability. He called it the Defiance Protocol. In that event, my orders are to demonstrate the consequences of your choice. He looked at the unconscious Luffy. If you will not surrender, then you will take your captain's place. You will bear his burden. Kuma placed a paw-padded hand on Luffy's chest. A massive, translucent, red bubble in the shape of a paw print emerged from Luffy's body. It pulsed with a malevolent energy. This is it, Kuma said. All the pain, all the damage, all the fatigue Luffy has accumulated in his battle against Moria. A taste of this would be lethal for a normal man. If you can survive this, I will leave you be. Zoro stepped forward. No, take me instead. As his first mate, the burden is mine to share. Zoro. No, Sanji yelled, trying to stop him, only to be knocked out by a swift blow from the swordsman. Zoro faced Kuma. Do it. Kuma looked from Zoro to Naruto, his expression unreadable. Then he did something unexpected. He didn't just press his hand to Zoro. He swept it across the entire crew. Nami, Robin, Usopp, Chopper, Frankie, Brook. Small, shimmering bubbles of red energy floated from each of them, each one containing their own pain, their own exhaustion, their own trauma. Nami's 8 years of suffering under Arlong. Robin's 20 years on the run, the horror of Ohara. Brook's 50 years of loneliness. All these bubbles of pain floated through the air and merged with Luffy's massive one, creating a colossal, swirling vortex of pure, concentrated suffering. It was the collective agony of the entire Straw Hat crew. It was a psychic nuke. This, Kuma said, his voice holding a sliver of something that might have been pity, is the true cost of your defiance. This is the pain you are asking your friends to carry. Bear all of it, and I will report your survival. Refuse, and I will be forced to annihilate you all. Naruto looked at the swirling red mass of agony. He saw flashes within it. A young Nami crying over her mother's body, a child Robin watching her home burn. A young Vivi weeping for her kingdom. He saw all their pain, all their sorrow, laid bare. He walked past Zoro, placing a hand on his friend's shoulder. It's okay, Zoro, he said quietly. You've done enough. This one's mine. He stepped before the monstrous bubble of pain, not a flicker of hesitation on his face. Nami and Robin, still conscious, could only watch in mute, abject horror. Naruto. No, Nami screamed, her voice breaking. Please. He turned and gave them one last, reassuring smile. It's all right. I'm used to it. And he walked into it. The pain was absolute. It was not physical. It was a metaphysical flood that bypassed his skin, his muscles, his bones, and crashed directly into his soul. He felt Nami's years of hope turning to ash. He felt Robin's loneliness, a cold so profound it burned. He felt Zoro's ambition being crushed, Sanji's chivalry being mocked, Luffy's boundless optimism being suffocated. He felt the collective weight of all their nightmares, all their losses, all their fears. His own formidable willpower, forged in war and loss, was the only thing that kept him from being instantly annihilated. Kurama roared in his mind, a furious, helpless sound. His regenerative chakra useless against a wound that was not of the flesh. Naruto didn't scream. He didn't cry out. He stood there, his body trembling violently, his knuckles white, his jaw clenched so hard his teeth threatened to shatter. He took it all. Every last drop of their suffering, he took it into himself. The red bubble vanished, absorbed completely. Naruto stood alone in a crater of his own making, his head bowed. Blood dripped from his nose, his ears. Every inch of his body was screaming. He was a vessel filled to bursting with the pain of the people he loved most in the world. He swayed, and then, with a shuddering breath, he straightened his back. He stood tall. Kuma stared, his mechanical mind unable to process the sight. He had expected screams. He had expected collapse. He did not expect this silent, defiant endurance. He had seen men with wills of iron, but this was something else entirely. This was a will of diamond. Report to Silas, Naruto rasped, his voice raw, that his experiment was a success. He lifted his head, his eyes burning with an intensity that made even the warlord flinch. He proved that my bonds are not my weakness. They are the source of my strength. And for trying to use them against me, tell him I will find him. And I will make him pay. Kuma was silent for a long time. Then, he gave a slow, almost respectful nod. And with a faint pop, he vanished. When the rest of the crew awoke, they found Sanji standing in a field of upturned earth. And in the center of it, Naruto. He was still on his feet, his arms crossed, his orange jacket in tatters. Facing the rising sun, he was covered in his own blood from head to toe, but he was standing. Naruto! Nami shrieked, running to him. Hey, what happened here? Sanji asked, looking around, his memory fuzzy. Zoro, what did you do? Zoro, leaning against a rock, his own body screaming in protest from the few seconds he had endured, just grunted. Nothing. Nothing at all. Nami and Robin reached Naruto. He was conscious, but barely. His eyes were unfocused, staring into nothing. When Nami touched his arm, he flinched, a low, pained groan escaping his lips. He was a raw, open wound. The two women, their faces a mask of tears and fury, gently, carefully, helped him back to the ship. Vivi, who had heard the entire horrifying ordeal over the still open line, was silent. Her grief and love a palpable force even across the thousands of miles of ocean. They laid him down in the infirmary. For days, the three of them nursed him. Nami cleaned his wounds. Robin read to him, her calm voice a soothing balm against the storm raging in his mind. And Vivi, through the den mushi placed by his bedside, sang him the lullabies of Alabasta, her voice a fragile, hopeful melody in the quiet room. There was no jealousy now. No competition. Only a shared, fierce, absolute love for the man who had literally taken all their pain and made it his own. In that crucible of sacrifice, their individual affections had been forged into a single, unbreakable shield around his heart. They were his. He was theirs. They were a unit. On the third day, Vivi made a decision. She stood before her advisors, her face resolute. Agaram, Chaka, the kingdom is in your hands. You have proven you can lead our people. Princess, where are you going? Agaram asked, his face full of concern. Vivi looked out the window. Toward the sea. My place is no longer here on a throne, she said, her voice clear and strong. My place is by his side. A kingdom needs a leader. But he needs his family. She walked out of the palace, leaving behind her crown, her title, her duty. Her heart had made its choice. She was going to find a ship. She was going to sea. She was going home. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. The dawn of a new era. The air in the new world tasted different. It was sharper, charged with the raw, untamed haki of the emperors and the lingering ghosts of legendary battles. It was an ocean of monsters, and the thousand sunny sailed through it like a defiant spark of light. Naruto had healed, but the change in him was profound. Kuma's cruel test had not broken him, it had tempered him. The pain he had shouldered for his friends had become a part of him, a constant, low hum beneath his skin that had sharpened his senses and stripped away the last vestiges of his youthful naivete. He was calmer, more focused, and the power that radiated from him was no longer just a maelstrom, it was the quiet, terrifying pressure of the deep ocean. His bond with Nami, Robin, and now Vivi, who had shocked them all by appearing on a Revolutionary Army vessel at their next port of call, having leveraged her father's old connections to find them, had evolved into something unspoken and absolute. There was no need for grand declarations. It was in the way Nami would instinctively chart a course around areas where his sage mode felt a flicker of danger, the way Robin would translate an ancient text and leave notes for him on how it might relate to the sealing arts of his world, the way Vivi would take watch with him, her presence a quiet, steady comfort under the alien stars. They moved around him like planets orbiting a sun, each in her own way drawing strength from him and giving it back in turn. The world, however, was not content to leave them in peace. Executor Silas, having failed to break Naruto psychologically, had escalated his war. The name, Straw Hat, had become a symbol of rebellion, a rallying cry for those disillusioned with the world government's tyrannical order. The revolutionaries, led by Luffy's enigmatic father, Monkey D. Dragon, saw them as allies. Entire kingdoms, inspired by the truth of Alabasta, began to quietly resist the celestial tributes. Silas, and by extension his shadowy master Amu, could not tolerate this. The Maelstrom anomaly was no longer just a threat, he was a catalyst for global revolution. The final gambit was set. A calculated leak, a whisper campaign spreading through the underworld and the Marines alike. The world government, using technology reverse-engineered by Dr. Vegapunk from the plans of the ancient weapon Pluton, had created a mobile superweapon called the Eraser. Its target, the information claimed, was Alabasta, to make an example of the first kingdom that had openly aligned itself with the Straw Hat's cause. It was a lie, a perfect piece of bait. Naruto knew it. He's not going to attack Alabasta, Naruto said, standing before the assembled captains of the Straw Hat Grand Fleet, which had gathered in neutral waters of the Wano country after its liberation. The fleet was a bizarre, powerful collection of warriors, all of whom had pledged their loyalty to Luffy, but whose respect for Naruto was something bordering on religious awe. Silas knows I'd just teleport there directly. He's not that stupid. He pointed to a different location on the map, a desolate, fortified island in the most volatile stretch of the new world known as the Cauldron. He's luring us here. He wants a decisive battle, on his terms. It's a trap, Bartolomeo, the fanatical Straw Hat admirer, stated the obvious. Of course it's a trap, Naruto replied, a slow, dangerous smile playing on his lips. But the cheese is real. He's moved a significant portion of the world government's central command there. The 5 elders will be observing. Maybe even higher. His eyes glinted with a cold fire. He was done playing defense. He was done reacting. It was time to take the fight to them. It was time to cut the head off the snake. Vivi stepped forward, her bearing no longer just that of a princess, but of a queen and a revolutionary. The Revolutionary Army has committed its full support. Mr. Dragon agrees. This is our best, perhaps our only, chance to strike at the heart of the world government. The plan was audacious. They would knowingly walk into the trap, but they would turn it into a battlefield of their own choosing. The Grand Fleet and the revolutionaries would engage the massive marine armada, a grand-scale naval battle to keep the cannon fodder busy. The Straw Hat's primary mission was infiltration, to punch through the elite defenses and confront the leaders themselves. Nami, now one of the most brilliant navigators in the world, commanded a wing of the fleet from the bridge of a revolutionary vessel. Her claim attacked now a weapon capable of generating localized storms. Robin, working with the revolutionaries' intelligence corps, used her vast knowledge to pinpoint logistical weaknesses in the enemy's formation, directing sabotage missions with deadly precision. Vivi, a powerful symbol of righteous rebellion, acted as a field commander and diplomat, her presence inspiring courage in the Allied forces. They were no longer just the companions of a powerhouse, they were powerhouses in their own right. As the battle commenced, the sea around the cauldron turned into a hellscape of cannon fire and shouting. Naruto, cloaked in his full Kurama chakra mode, stood on the deck of the Thousand Sunny as it charged toward the island. He was a golden god of war, a beacon in the chaos. Luffy, he yelled over the din. The elders are yours. Go show them what the next king of the pirates looks like. Luffy grinned, his own body already steaming with gear second. Shishishi, you got it. Just leave the silent freak to me. The crew launched their attack, a spearhead of unstoppable will. Zoro and Sanji became a blur of steel and flame, carving a path through the pacifista cyborgs that guarded the shore. Frankie's gadgets and Usopp's trick shots sowed chaos. Chopper, in his monster point, was a furry wrecking ball. Naruto's target was different. He leapt from the ship, landing on the black, volcanic rock of the island. And simply waited. He knew Silas would come for him. And he did. Silas appeared not with a grand entrance, but with his signature, oppressive silence. A massive dome of null space expanded, covering half the island. Inside this zone of absolute silence, the world died. The roar of the battle, the crashing of the waves, even the sensation of the wind ceased to exist. Worse, Naruto felt his connection to Kurama flicker and dim, the raw energy of his chakra avatar struggling to manifest. Silas, through Vegapunk's twisted science, had amplified his devil fruit. He could now dampen not just energy, but the very life force the world called Haki. It is over, Maelstrom, Silas's voice echoed, the only sound in his dead world. He stood before Naruto, no longer in his white uniform, but in a suit of black, light-absorbing armor, the same material as Kestrel's blade. Here, in my sanctuary, you are just a man. And I am a god. You're the second-rate god I've fought this year, Naruto shot back. His voice strained. He couldn't use his jutsus. His Kurama cloak was suppressed. He was back to where he was at Eni's lobby, but worse. He had only his physical strength and his sage training. And the other one had a better personality. Their battle was a brutal, desperate affair. It was a clash of pure physical prowess and ideology. Silas, with his armor and perfect silence, was a flawless killing machine. Naruto, relying on the pure, unadulterated martial arts that had been drilled into him since he was a child, was a force of raw, unpredictable life. He couldn't sense Silas's attacks, but his body, honed by 1,000 battles, remembered the rhythm of combat. He moved on instinct, his sage-enhanced reflexes the only thing keeping him alive. He took hits. The black armor was like hitting a mountain, and Silas's strikes were fast and precise. Naruto's blood painted the black rock, but he kept getting up, a stubborn, indomitable grin on his face. "Why do you keep fighting?" Silas demanded, his cold facade finally cracking with frustration as he landed a blow that should have shattered Naruto's ribs. "You cannot win. I have neutralized your power. I have silenced your world. You think my power comes from my chakra?" Naruto coughed, spitting out a mouthful of blood. "You think it comes from the fox?" He pushed himself up, his body screaming, but his eyes blazing with a light that Silas's silence couldn't extinguish. "My power comes from my promise. To my master, who taught me to never give up. To my friends, who taught me the strength of bonds. To my parents, who gave me their love." He charged, not with a burst of chakra, but with a surge of pure, unadulterated willpower. He wasn't aiming for the armor. He was aiming for the man inside. His fist, raw and bleeding, slammed into Silas's masked face. The mask didn't break, but Silas's concentration did. For a fraction of a second, the dome of silence flickered. It was all Naruto needed. In that instant, the world roared back to life. Kurama's chakra, vast and furious, exploded from him, shattering the black armor like glass. Sage art. Massive Rasengan barrage. He roared. Dozens of clones appeared, each holding a giant Rasengan, and they all slammed into the exposed, terrified Silas at once. The resulting explosion was not one of silence, but of pure, world-shaking sound and fury. It tore the island apart, sending a shockwave that rocked the very ocean. When the light faded, Silas was gone, utterly and completely erased by the power he had tried so hard to suppress. Naruto stood in the center of the crater, panting, his golden cloak flickering. He had won, but the war wasn't over. He looked up at the citadel at the island's peak. He could feel Luffy, locked eye, in a battle that was shaking the foundations of the world. He arrived at the throne room just as Luffy, in his new, awe-inspiring Gear 5th form, a being of pure, cartoonish freedom and imagination, delivered a final, giant-sized punch that sent a shadowy, crown-wearing figure, the true form of a Mu, crashing through the castle and into the sea below. The 5 elders lay defeated around the room, the centuries of tyrannical rule brought to an end by a boy with a rubber body and a dream. But Naruto knew it wasn't that simple. A Mu was a concept as much as a person. The true victory wasn't in defeating him. It was in what came next. He saw a single, active broadcast Den Den Mushi in the corner of the room. It was transmitting everything to the world. Silas had set it up to broadcast his victory. Now, it was broadcasting his defeat, and the fall of his masters. Naruto walked over to it. He looked into its glassy eye, and he spoke. He didn't speak as a conqueror or a king. He spoke as Naruto Uzumaki. He didn't talk of taking power. He told them of his world, of its villages, of its people, shinobi, samurai, monks, and citizens, who fought and argued and disagreed, but who were ultimately free to choose their own path. He spoke of the will of fire, the belief that love and loyalty were the true foundations of strength. He didn't offer them a new ruler. He offered them an idea. "The throne is empty," he said, his voice carrying across the globe, to every island, every ship. "Don't let anyone else sit on it. Not me, not Luffy, not anyone. Your world is yours now. So, live in it. Fight for it, protect it." He destroyed the throne with a single, casual Rasengan, and then he turned off the camera. Weeks later, the 1,000 Sunny sailed on a peaceful sea. The world was in chaos, but it was a hopeful chaos. The Marines were fractured, some remaining loyal to the old ways, others, like Kobe and Smoker, trying to build a new, more just organization. Kingdoms were asserting their independence. The Revolutionary Army was helping to establish new democracies. The age of pirates hadn't ended, but a new era had dawned alongside it. On the grassy deck of the Sunny, the crew was celebrating. Luffy was eating. Zoro was sleeping, the usual beautiful chaos. Naruto stood at the railing, watching the sunset. He was no longer a lost boy. He was a legend in two worlds. He had found his place, not as a Hokage, but as something more, a protector of the people he loved. He felt three presences join him. Nami leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. Thinking about home, she asked softly. Sometimes, he admitted, I miss them. But, this is home now, too. Robin stood on his other side, her hand finding his. You gave them their freedom, she said, her voice full of a quiet pride that made his heart swell. You upheld your ninja way. Vivi stood before him, her blue hair catching the last rays of the sun. She had decided to stay. Her duty, she had argued, was to help build the new world she had helped create. Her place was here, with them. She took his other hand, her grip firm, her eyes shining with a love and respect that was as vast as the sea. You showed them what a true leader is, Naruto. Someone who gives power to the people, instead of taking it for themselves. He looked at the three of them. Nami, his anchor to the present, the brilliant, fiery woman who found him adrift and given him a family. Robin, his link to the past, the wise, resilient soul who understood the weight of history and the price of survival. Vivi, his hope for the future, the noble, compassionate heart who would help guide the world into the dawn. He smiled, a genuine, relaxed, truly happy smile. The smile of a man who was no longer running, no longer fighting a lonely battle. The smile of a man who was home. He pulled the three of them into a group hug, burying his face in a mess of orange, black, and blue hair. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant shades of orange, his color, a promise of a new day. The Maelstrom's heart was finally at peace, surrounded by the incredible, impossible family he had found in the endless blue. The adventure was far from over, but for the first time in a very long time, Naruto Uzumaki was exactly where he was supposed to be. Chapter 7 End.